expected, sliding in from the water with a density that pressed against windows and streetlights as if it had weight. It muted sound, swallowed distance, and turned familiar intersections into uncertain shapes. By the time the harbour sirens sounded their low warning, the city was already moving more slowly, people unconsciously adjusting their pace, as though the air itself had asked them to be careful. Elias Rowe noticed the silence first. He stood on the third-floor balcony of the Municipal Archives building, a mug of burnt coffee cooling in his hand, watching the cranes at Dock 7 vanish one by one into the grey. The fog should have carried the usual noises, the slap of water against pylons, the diesel cough of trawlers, the distant shouts of dock workers. But instead, there was only a dull, padded quiet, like the moment after a heavy snowfall. "That's not right," he murmured, though no one was there to hear him. Elias was not a man prone to superstition. He catalogued forgotten permits, shipping manifests, infrastructure schematics, evidence of decisions made decades earlier by people who assumed no one would ever look again. He trusted paper, ink, dates. The past behaved when it was properly filed. Yet something about that morning refused to fit. Inside the archives, the lights flickered, not enough to trigger alarms, just a subtle dip, a collective blink. Elias finished his coffee, set the mug down, and returned to the long table where a single box waited for him, unmarked except for a faded inventory code, BX 1197. The box had arrived overnight. No delivery slip, no sender, no digital trace in the intake system. That alone would have been strange. What unsettled him was that the inventory code already existed in the database. BX 1197 had been logged once before, on March 14th, 2042. Exactly 1 year earlier. Elias lifted the lid. Inside lay a stack of documents bound with twine, yellowed but intact. The top page was a memo, typed, unsigned, stamped with a seal he did not recognize, a circular mark containing a broken compass rose. He read the first line twice. Transfer authorized under contingency mirror. His breath slowed. Contingency protocols were not unusual in municipal systems, earthquakes, floods, civil emergencies, but mirror was not a designation he had ever encountered. He flipped through the pages, each one more disorienting than the last. Site diagrams of underground structures that did not appear on any official map. Incident logs describing acoustic anomalies beneath the eastern seawall. Witness statements from dock workers, engineers, and a single city council aide whose name had been carefully redacted. All dated March 14th, 2042. A year ago to the day. Elias checked the clock on the wall. 8:17. Outside, the foghorn sounded again, closer this time. He should have reported the box immediately. That was protocol. Instead, he kept reading. By mid-morning, the city's transit authority announced delays across the waterfront line. Electrical crews were dispatched to investigate intermittent power drops. A small crowd gathered near Pier 9, where the water churned strangely, rising and falling without rhythm, as though something beneath the surface was breathing. No official statements were released. In the archives, Elias reached the final document, a handwritten note on heavy stock paper. If this arrives again, it read, do not assume it is a mistake. The city will repeat itself unless someone interrupts the sequence. The handwriting was neat, familiar. It was his own. Elias pushed back from the table so abruptly that the chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound startling in the otherwise hushed room. His pulse hammered. He had never written this. He was certain of that. And yet the slope of the letters, the way the E's looped just slightly too wide, it was unmistakable. He checked the date beneath the note. March 14th, 2042. 1 year ago. A knock echoed through the archives. "Elias?" a voice called. "You in there?" Mara Vance stepped inside before he could answer, her raincoat already damp from the fog. Mara worked for the city's Infrastructure Oversight Office, a department that technically existed but was rarely discussed. She had the look of someone who slept in short intervals and trusted nothing without testing it twice. "You're not answering your messages," she said. Then she saw the open box. "What is that?" "Something that shouldn't be here," Elias replied. And apparently was. He showed her the documents. He watched her expression shift, not to surprise, but to recognition. "So it's happening again," she said quietly. "You knew about this?" "I knew about pieces," Mara answered. "Enough to be told to forget them." Outside, the fog thickened. The harbour sirens stopped altogether. Somewhere beneath Larkspur Bay, something adjusted, like a mechanism waking from a long pause. And the city took another breath. By noon, Larkspur Bay no longer pretended that the morning was ordinary. The fog had settled into the streets instead of lifting, pooling between buildings and clinging to doorways like a watchful thing. Traffic lights glowed as blurred halos. Sound behaved strangely. Voices carried too far in some places, vanished entirely in others. The city felt misaligned, as if shifted half a step to the left of itself. Elias followed Mara through the service corridor beneath the archives, his thoughts lagging behind his feet. The corridor smelled of damp concrete and old wiring. Emergency lights cast everything in a pale amber that made it difficult to tell how much time was passing. "You said you were told to forget," Elias said. "By whom?" Mara didn't answer immediately. She unlocked a steel door marked "Maintenance Authorized Personnel Only" and ushered him inside. The room beyond was small, windowless, and humming with the sound of servers that should not have existed in a municipal building from the 1980s. "By people who don't like loose ends," she said finally, "and who are very good at making sure memory behaves." Elias stopped walking. "Are you telling me—" "I'm telling you," Mara interrupted, "that last year on this exact date the city authorized a containment operation that never officially happened. No public records, no press, no permanent staff assignments. Everyone involved was reassigned, promoted, retired, or redirected." "Redirected where?" Mara met his eyes. "That's the part I don't remember clearly." The admission unsettled him more than any of the documents. Mara was precise, to the point of obsession. For her to acknowledge a gap meant the gap mattered. She powered up one of the terminals. Lines of text scrolled past, resolving into a familiar but restricted interface. Elias recognized the architecture. It mirrored the archival indexing system, but with layers he had never been allowed to access. "This is what survived," Mara said. "Fragments, cross-references, shadows of files that were erased but not cleanly." She typed in a single phrase, "contingency mirror." The system paused. Outside, somewhere deep in the city, metal groaned. A directory opened. Inside were 7 entries, all labelled "Incident Window," all dated March 14th, 2042. Each entry ended with the same status note, "Incomplete." Elias felt a chill creep up his spine. 7, he said. "That's not random." "No," Mara agreed. 7 sites, 7 disturbances, 7 opportunities to stop whatever this is. And we failed. Mara's jaw tightened. Or we succeeded too well. The screen flickered. For a split second, Elias saw something else layered beneath the interface, a schematic that looked like the city map folded inward, lines converging beneath the bay. Then it was gone. Did you see that? He asked. Mara nodded slowly. It's starting earlier this time. A sharp crack echoed through the building, followed by a tremor that rattled the server racks. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. Both of them froze. That came from the waterfront, Elias said. Mara was already moving. Pier 9. They emerged onto the street, into a city that no longer held its breath. It exhaled all at once. People stood clustered on sidewalks, staring toward the harbor. The water had pulled back from the shore, exposing dark, slick pilings and the uneven bed beneath. Boats strained against their moorings. The fog above the bay churned, rotating slowly like a lid being unscrewed. At the edge of Pier 9, a low-frequency sound vibrated through Elias's chest, more felt than heard. It set his teeth on edge, stirred something uneasy and familiar in his gut. This wasn't in the reports, he said. Mara scanned the scene, her face pale. Because we never let it get this far. The water surged forward, suddenly slamming against the pier. People screamed and scattered. For a moment Elias thought he saw shapes moving beneath the surface, angles that didn't belong to waves. Then the sound stopped. The fog thinned just enough to reveal the bay again, calm and deceptively normal. Sirens wailed in the distance. Elias realized his hands were shaking. This is the repetition, he said, the sequence. Yes, Mara replied, and if the documents are right, we're already behind. She reached into a coat and pulled out a small recorder, its casing scratched and worn. She pressed it into his hand. This was mine last year, she said. I don't remember making these recordings, but you might. Why me? Mara hesitated. Because your handwriting was on that note, and because whatever reset the city didn't erase you completely. Elias looked down at the recorder. Somewhere beneath Larkspur Bay, something shifted again, closer this time, more aware. And the second window began to open. The recorder did not want to be silent. Elias noticed it the moment he crossed the threshold of his apartment. The device sat heavy in his palm, inert at first glance, but warm, faintly, insistently warm, like something alive trying not to be noticed. He set it on the kitchen counter and stepped back, the way one might give space to a wounded animal. Outside, Larkspur Bay groaned under the weight of emergency response. Sirens braided together into a single unbroken wail. Helicopter blades chopped at the fog overhead, briefly carving holes in the grey before it closed again. Mara stood by the window, watching the street below. They'll cordon off Pier 9, she said. They always do. You said always, Elias replied. She didn't turn. Habit of speech. He pressed play. Static flooded the room, thick and textured, followed by a breath, close to the microphone, unsteady. Then Mara's voice, unmistakably hers, but older in a way Elias couldn't explain. Tired, sharpened by fear. Asterisk, March 14, 2042, asterisk, the voice said, asterisk. If you're hearing this, the city has looped again. That means we've failed to collapse the seventh window. Elias's stomach tightened. The recording continued. Asterisk. We were wrong about the source. It isn't an intrusion, it's a reflection. The city is not being invaded. It is being answered. Mara finally turned toward him. Her face had gone slack, as though the words had loosened something behind her eyes. I don't remember saying that, she whispered. The recorder clicked softly as the message ended. Silence rushed in to fill the space it left. Answered by what? Elias asked. Mara shook her head. That's the question we never finished. Another tremor rippled through the building, gentler than before but unmistakable. The lights dimmed, then steadied. Elias felt it then, Not fear exactly, but a pressure behind his thoughts, like a hand resting against glass. Images flickered at the edge of his awareness. A map folded too many times, a corridor that bent where it shouldn't, water flowing upward. "This is why I was spared," he said slowly. "Whatever erases memory, it can't do it cleanly, not to me." Mara studied him. "Or you're the anchor." The word landed with weight. They didn't have time to unpack it. Elias's phone vibrated. No ringtone, no notification banner, just a vibration that felt deliberate. "Unknown caller." He answered. "Elias Rowe," a man's voice said. Calm, measured. "You have something that belongs to the city." Mara's eyes snapped to his. "And you have about 6 minutes," the voice continued, "before infrastructure oversight is formally dissolved." "That's not possible," Elias said. "It's protected under—" "Contingency," the man finished. "Yes, Mira specifically." The line went dead. Mara exhaled sharply. "They're accelerating." "Who are they?" "The ones who benefit if the loop stabilizes," she said, "or if no one notices it at all." Another vibration, this time from the recorder. It powered itself on. A new message played, layered beneath a low, resonant hum that made the walls seem to lean inward. "Asterisk third window opens beneath the eastern grid," the recorded Mara said. Asterisk. "If you're late, don't go alone. If you're early, don't go at all." Elias looked at Mara. "Eastern grid?" She nodded grimly. "Old flood tunnels, sealed after the quake. No cameras, no witnesses." "Then that's where we're going." Mara hesitated, just for a moment. "Last year," she said, "this is where I stopped remembering things." Elias picked up the recorder and slipped it into his pocket. The warmth had grown stronger. "Then this time," he said, "we changed the sequence." Outside, the fog began to move inland, slowly, deliberately, like a tide reversing direction. And somewhere beneath the city, the third window unlocked. The entrance to the eastern grid was not hidden so much as forgotten. Elias would have walked past it 100 times without noticing. A maintenance hatch, half swallowed by ivy, at the base of an abandoned pump station, its warning placards bleached blank by years of salt air. The city had a talent for letting inconvenient things fade quietly into the background. Mara cut the chain with practiced efficiency. The metal snapped too easily. "That wasn't city grade," she muttered. Someone wanted this to look sealed. The hatch yawned open, exhaling air that smelled of wet stone and something older, iron maybe, or stagnant time. Elias clicked on his flashlight. The beam disappeared downward into a sloping concrete throat etched with old measurement marks and newer scratches that did not look accidental. They descended. With each step, the sound of the city above thinned until it felt theoretical. The fog did not follow them, but the pressure did. That same sense of being watched through layers of material. "Do you hear that?" Elias asked. Mara paused. "Hear what?" "That's the problem," he said. "I think I'm remembering it instead." The tunnel leveled out, branching into a wide chamber where floodgates once controlled the bay's temper. The gates were frozen open now, their control panels gutted, wires trailing like veins pulled from a body. In the center of the chamber, the water was wrong. It did not pool. It did not flow. It hovered in a shallow basin, its surface trembling without ripples, reflecting light in fractured planes. Mara swallowed. "It's already active." Elias stepped closer, his reflection breaking apart in the suspended surface. For a moment, He saw another version of the chamber, intact, brightly lit, crowded with people in city uniforms he did not recognize. Then it snapped back. The recorder in his pocket grew hot. A voice bled through the static, distorted but urgent. Asterisk, this is where the answers stop behaving like answers, it said. Asterisk, if you cross the boundary, the city will start recognizing you. Mara reached out, stopping Elias with a hand on his arm. Last year, she said quietly, this is where we lost 2 people, not dead, just gone, erased. No, Mara replied. Replaced? A sound rolled through the chamber then, not loud but deep, resonant, like stone remembering how to sing. The hovering water shuddered and stretched upward, forming a thin, vertical plane. A window. Through it, Elias glimpsed streets he knew arranged incorrectly, intersections reversed, buildings standing where open space should be. People moved through that mirrored city, their motions slightly delayed as if responding to a cue Elias could not hear. One of them stopped. It looked directly at him. Elias staggered back as pain lanced behind his eyes. Images flooded in. His apartment, empty, the archives sealed, his own name spoken in a tone of regret. Mara was shouting, though he couldn't make out the words. The figure on the other side of the window raised its hand, and Elias understood with terrifying clarity. This was not a breach. It was a correspondence. The city had been calling out into the dark, and something built like it had answered. The window shuddered, cracks spidering across its surface. Mara dragged Elias away just as the suspended water collapsed, crashing into the basin with a force that sent a shockwave through the chamber. Lights exploded, concrete screamed. They ran. Behind them, the third window did not close. It learned. The first official use of the word UFO came at 1842. By then, Larkspur Bay was already fractured into versions of itself. News drones hovered above the waterfront, their cameras cutting through the thinning fog to capture what eyewitnesses were already describing in panicked, overlapping fragments. Emergency broadcasts replaced regular programming. A red banner crawled across every public screen. Unidentified aerial phenomenon. Harbor airspace restricted. Elias and Mara watched from the roof of a mid-rise apartment building 3 blocks inland. Sirens screamed below them, but up here the sound thinned, stretched, as if reluctant to climb. There, Mara said. Elias followed her gaze. Above the bay, suspended just beyond the reach of the remaining fog, something held position against the wind. It was not large, no bigger than a city bus, but it bent perspective around it. The edges refused to stay still, folding inward and outward like a shape being remembered imperfectly. Lights pulsed along its surface in slow, uneven intervals, not blinking so much as breathing. It made no sound. Radar feeds later would show confusion, returns splitting, recombining, vanishing entirely, but to the naked eye, it was undeniably there. A UFO. Elias felt the pressure behind his thoughts intensify, the familiar glass wall sensation now vibrating, humming in time with the object above the water. That wasn't in the windows, he said. No, Mara replied. This is new. As if in response, the object tilted, an impossible motion without visible propulsion, and began to descend. Boats scattered. Helicopters veered away, their pilots shouting into open channels. One military drone surged forward before dropping out of the sky, its systems dead. The UFO stopped 20 meters above the bay's surface. Then the water beneath it rose, not splashing, not surging, lifting. A column of seawater ascended, smooth as poured glass, connecting ocean to object like a tether. The lights along the craft brightened, shifting frequency until Elias felt them in his teeth. His recorder activated itself. Static. Then a chorus of overlapping voices, some human, some distorted beyond easy classification. Asterisk. This is the convergence point, the voices said. Asterisk. A visible answer was required. Mara backed away from the ledge. It wants to be seen. Or named, Elias said. As if summoned by the thought, the emergency broadcast tone cut through every device in the city. This is a joint statement from the National Aerial Safety Directorate, a calm voice announced. An unidentified flying object has entered restricted airspace above Larkspur Bay. There is no indication of hostile intent at this time. Hostile intent. Elias almost laughed. The UFO rotated slowly, presenting a surface that rippled like liquid metal. Symbols crawled across it, geometric, recursive, never quite settling into the same configuration twice. Then something detached. A smaller object dropped free, falling toward the bay before stopping abruptly mid-air. It unfolded into a lattice of light, projecting an image across the fog. A map. Larkspur Bay overlaid with the folded, inverted geometry Elias had glimpsed before. 7 points pulsed across the city. 5 were dark. 2 glowed. We're running out of windows, Mara whispered. The projection shifted. A new symbol appeared at the center, directly above the eastern grid. And beneath it, a date. March 14th, 2043. Today. The UFO emitted its first sound then, not a roar, not a hum, but a pressure wave that passed through the city like a held breath, finally released. People screamed. Elias felt something inside him align, click into place with a certainty that terrified him. It's not here to invade, he said. It's here to synchronize. The lights across the city dimmed as one. Above the bay, the unidentified object held steady, waiting. And for the first time, Larkspur Bay looked up and realized it was no longer alone. The military arrived without ceremony. By 1930, the sky above Larkspur Bay had been rewritten, restricted corridors carved into the air, invisible lines enforced by jets that never crossed them. Naval vessels formed a loose perimeter offshore, their silhouettes steady and deliberate, as if calm alone could impose order. The UFO did not react. It remained suspended above the bay, indifferent to escalation, its surface continuing its slow recursive shift. The column of water tethering it to the ocean thinned but did not break, stretching like a patient filament. Elias and Mara had been escorted firmly but politely into a temporary command center established in the sublevels of City Hall. The building vibrated faintly with generators and hurried footsteps. Screens lined the walls, each showing a different angle of the same impossible object. A woman in a dark uniform studied them from across the room. Dr. Celine Hart, she said, National Aerial Safety Directorate. Her gaze lingered on Elias. You're the archivist. And you're very late, Mara replied before Elias could speak. Celine's expression didn't change. We needed confirmation before we named it. You named it UFO, Mara said. That's not confirmation, that's containment language. Celine inclined her head slightly. Language shapes panic. And panic shapes truth, Elias said quietly. Celine turned to him then. You've been flagged as a continuity anomaly? The words landed with clinical precision. Say that again, Elias said. Celine gestured to one of the screens. It shifted to a thermal overlay, then to something Elias had never seen before, a visualization of probability density mapped over the city. At exactly 7 points, Celine said, reality behaves inconsistently, memory degradation, spatial recursion, temporal echoing. You are centered in 4 of the recorded incidents from last year. Mara stiffened. You said there were no complete records. There aren't, Celine replied, but absence leaves patterns. Another officer approached, speaking in a low voice. Selina listened, then nodded. The object has responded to our signals, she said. Not directly, but its emission frequency adjusted to match our carrier wave. Communication? Elias asked. Alignment, Celine corrected. It's mirroring us. As if on cue, the screens flickered. The map projection reappeared, this time inside the command center, bleeding through displays not designed to show it. The 7 points pulsed again. One of the dark ones brightened. Another window, Mara whispered. It's opening on its own. Alarm sounded. Somewhere above them, concrete cracked. Celine's voice sharpened. Evacuate the Western District. Now. No, Elias said suddenly. Every eye turned towards him. If you evacuate, he continued, the words coming faster now, clearer, you accelerate convergence. The city responds to absence the same way it responds to pressure. Celine studied him with new interest. How do you know that? Elias closed his eyes. He saw himself standing in this room before, older, exhausted, saying the same words and being ignored. We tried force last time, he said. We tried silence, we tried erasure. None of it worked. Mara stepped beside him. The UFO isn't a threat display, it's a reference point. Celine's jaw tightened. You're suggesting we do nothing. I'm suggesting, Elias said, we do something precise. The lights dimmed again, deeper this time. The building groaned. On the largest screen, the UFO rotated, revealing a surface that now reflected the city below, not as it was, but as it could be. Streets aligned. The folded geometry eased. One of the 7 points went dark. Closed. A hush fell over the command center. Celine exhaled slowly. What did you just do? Elias opened his eyes. Remembered, he said. Above Larkspur Bay, the unidentified object adjusted its position, subtly, deliberately, waiting for the next correction. The city did not calm. It recalibrated. From the windows of City Hall's sublevel, Larkspur Bay looked almost peaceful, light steady, traffic flowing again in cautious streams. But beneath that surface, something had shifted its weight. Elias felt it, the way sailors sense a changing current before instruments agree. Celine Hart dismissed most of the command staff within the hour. What remained was smaller, quieter, and far more dangerous. People who listened. They gathered around a single table. No screens, no projections. The object hasn't moved in 12 minutes, Celine said. That's the longest interval since it appeared. That's because it's waiting for input. Mara replied. Not orders, decisions. Celine's eyes narrowed. From whom? Before Elias could answer, the recorder in his pocket vibrated sharply, like a pulse against his hip. He placed it on the table. No one touched it. It turned itself on. This time the voice that emerged was not Mara's. It was his. Older, slower, certain in a way that frightened him. Asterisk, if you're hearing this, the 7th window was not closed, the voice said. Asterisk. That means the city still believes it needs an answer. Mara's breath caught. Celine leaned forward. That's you. Yes, Elias said, or who I become if we fail again. The recording continued. Asterisk. The UFO is a scaffold, a translation layer. It is not the source, it is the interface. The city built the question. This is what arrived to respond. Celine sat back, absorbing that. So the city did this to itself, she said. No, Mara corrected. The city did this because of us. A low-frequency vibration rolled through the building. Not violent, measured, the kind of signal meant to be felt, not heard. Above them, the UFO brightened. Elias stood. I need to go back to the eastern grid, he said. Selena's response was immediate. Absolutely not. The last window is anchored there, he continued, and it's anchored to me. Mara looked between them. He's right. Celine studied Elias for a long moment. If you're wrong, she said, we lose containment. If I'm right, Elias replied, we stop repeating ourselves. Another pulse. Stronger. On a distant screen, one of the remaining glowing... Stronger. On a distant screen, one of the remaining glowing points began to flicker. Celine swore under her breath. I'm authorizing a single unit escort, no weapons discharge unless fired upon. That won't matter, Mara said. They moved fast, through secured corridors, out into a city that pretended nothing was wrong. People laughed too loudly in cafes. Screens replayed official reassurances. The sky above the bay still held the impossible shape, now accepted as part of the skyline. At the flood tunnel entrance, the air felt tight, electrically charged. Elias stepped inside first. The chamber had changed. Where the water had collapsed before, it now formed a stable plain, clearer, brighter. The mirrored city beyond it was closer, more detailed. Elias could see people standing there watching, waiting. One step forward. It was him. Not identical, but aligned. Same posture, same tired eyes. The reflection raised its hand. Elias did the same. The recorder screamed to life. Asterisk. This is the point of divergence, the older Elias said. Asterisk. If you cross, the loop breaks, but the city will remember. Mara grabbed his arm. What does that mean? It means, Elias said softly, we won't get to forget. The reflected Elias pressed his palm to the surface of the window. The glass-thin barrier rippled. Above the city, the UFO rotated, locking into position. 7 points across Larkspur Bay pulsed once, then waited for Elias to decide. The moment Elias touched the surface, the city inhaled, not metaphorically, physically. Every pressure sensor across Larkspur Bay registered the same anomaly, a sudden, uniform drop, as if the atmosphere itself had leaned inward. Windows rattled, loose papers slid across desks. The bay's surface dimmed, then brightened like an eyes adjusting to light. Elias felt none of that. The barrier yielded under his palm with the resistance of cold gel, then gave way entirely. The sensation was not pain, not even movement, but reorientation. His sense of upfolded sound unstitched itself. For a fraction of a second, he was nowhere at all. Then he was standing on dry ground. The mirrored city was quieter, not empty, just subdued, like a room where people spoke in lowered voices out of respect for something unseen. Buildings stood straighter here, their lines cleaner, their materials subtly different. No rust, no cracks, no improvisations. This was Larkspur Bay as it would have been if nothing had ever gone wrong. The other Elias lowered his hand. You're late, he said. His voice was Elias's, but steadier, untouched by hesitation. Mara's shout echoed from somewhere behind, distorted and distant. Elias turned, but the window had thinned to a vertical thread of light. He could still see her, Celine, the soldiers, watching from the other side, like figures behind glass. The city did not want a crowd. "You built this," Elias said, turning back. "No," the other replied. "You authorized it." They walked. The streets adjusted around them, intersections smoothing, signals aligning without instruction. Elias realized with a jolt that the city was listening not to sound, but to intent. "You said the UFO was an interface," Elias said, "a scaffold." "It is," the other confirmed, "a visible compromise, something humans could point at and name instead of noticing what was really happening." "And what is really happening?" The other Elias stopped. "The city learned how to preserve itself," he said. "Not buildings, not people, patterns." A tremor rippled through the mirrored skyline. In the distance, a structure rose from beneath the bay, vast, geometric, unfolding like a thought becoming certain. Elias felt the pull immediately. Recognition, dread. "That's the core," he said. "Yes," the other replied. "The place where decisions stop decaying." Above both cities, the UFO flared, its lights synchronizing with the structure below. On the far side of the thinning window, alarms blared. Elias could see Celine shouting orders, powerless to intervene. "You crossed last time," Elias said slowly. "Didn't you?" The other nodded. "I did what you're about to do, and I stayed." "Why?" "Because someone had to anchor the memory." The implications settled heavily. "If I don't?" "The loop resumes," the other finished, "with variation, with damage." The ground beneath them pulsed, the structure in the distance locked into place. 7 points across both cities ignited simultaneously. Elias looked back toward the window, toward Mara. She met his eyes. Even through distortion, he could see she understood. The recorder screamed, its casing cracking as if under strain. "Asterisk choose." Asterisk, the overlapping voices demanded. Asterisk, preserve continuity or preserve yourself. Elias closed his eyes. For the first time since the fog arrived, the city waited, not passively, but attentively. For an answer it could keep. The city adjusted to the absence the way it always had, by pretending it was temporary. In the days following the disappearance of the UFO, official language softened everything sharp. Atmospheric misinterpretation, sensor cascade, psychological amplification. The words flowed smoothly, designed to slide past the parts of the mind that asked harder questions. Larkspur Bay accepted them. Mostly. Mara Vance did not. She stood at the edge of Pier 9 at dawn, the water calm, ordinary, almost mocking. No fog, no distortions, no hovering shapes in the sky. If she hadn't been there, if she hadn't felt the city tighten and release, she might have believed it herself. Her phone vibrated. Unknown source. Incoming data. She didn't hesitate. She never did anymore. The message was not text. It was a map, clean, minimal, stripped of embellishment. Larkspur Bay overlaid with a single pulsing point far inland, nowhere near the bay or the old flood tunnels. Beneath it, a timestamp. March 17th, 2043. 3 days from now. Mara's breath slowed. "They never stop," she murmured. At City Hall, Celine Hart reviewed the same data with a narrowing gaze. The Directorate's internal model showed stability, perfect, unsettling stability. No fluctuations, no noise. Too clean. "Pull historical variance," Celine ordered. An analyst hesitated. "How far back?" Celine thought of Elias, of the way the city had responded to him, as if relieved to be seen. "All of it," she said, "including the parts that don't officially exist." "Deep beneath the city," Elias felt the disturbance before it manifested. It arrived as a misalignment, not in space, not in time, but in intention, a subtle pressure against the city's rhythm, like a foreign note introduced into a familiar melody. Something was probing, not the mirror, not the reflection, something new. The city responded automatically, tightening constraints, reinforcing patterns Elias had only just begun to understand. He moved through the core with ease now, corridors unfolding in response to thought, not footfall. Memory was heavier here. He felt Mara distantly, not as an image, but as a vector, a constant variable the city had not erased, could not erase, without breaking something essential. The probing pressure intensified. Elias focused. Above ground, far from the bay, a section of the city flickered, not visibly, but perceptibly. People hesitated mid-step. Conversations stalled. For exactly 1 second, Larkspur Bay did not know what it was supposed to be. Then it remembered. A soundless pulse rippled outward. Mara gasped as the air thickened around her, her skin prickling. The pulsing point on her phone flared once, then stabilized. "This isn't over," she said aloud. "It's spreading." At that exact moment in a city hundreds of miles away, a man looked up at a clear sky and felt the sudden irrational certainty that something was listening. And deep within Larkspur Bay, Elias opened a new corridor, one the city had never needed before. Containment was no longer enough. The next sequence had begun. The anomaly did not announce itself. There was no fog, no lights in the sky, no sirens to warn anyone that the city had crossed another threshold. Larkspur Bay simply hesitated. The pause was brief, less than a heartbeat, but it was enough. Enough for Elias to feel it. Deep within the core, the city's internal geometry shifted, not folding inward as before, but stretching outward, as if something beyond its boundaries had tugged on a thread and found resistance. "That's not you," Elias said to the city. The city answered the only way it could, by showing him. A corridor opened that had never existed. Its walls were not concrete or steel, but layered probability, translucent and dense at the same time. As Elias moved through it, images bled through. Streets that were not Larkspur Bay, buildings with unfamiliar silhouettes, coastlines, shaped differently by history. Another city, not a mirror, a neighbor. Above ground, Mara felt the wrongness settle into her bones while standing in line for coffee. The barista froze mid-motion, hand hovering over a cup, eyes unfocused. Around her, half a dozen people stalled in similar, unconscious synchrony. Then it passed. The barista blinked. "Sorry," she said. "Did you say oat milk?" Mara paid and left without answering, heart racing. Her phone vibrated again. This time, the map showed 3 points. Not 7. Not 1. 3. Forming a triangle that extended beyond the city's limits. Celine Hart saw the same configuration and felt something close to dread. "These aren't windows," she said to the room. "They're overlaps." An analyst frowned. "Overlaps with what?" Selena didn't answer immediately. She was staring at a comparative overlay. Larkspur Bay aligned against data pulled from other urban centers, other infrastructure grids, other coastlines. Patterns were emerging. "They're learning from each other," she said finally. Below, Elias reached the end of the corridor. The space opened into a vast chamber, not a core like Larkspur Bay's, but something less refined, less stable. Its geometry wavered, struggling to maintain coherence. A city in early awareness. And it was afraid. Elias felt it like static against his thoughts. Raw, unfiltered intention without language to shape it. The instinct was familiar. Preserve. Repeat. Anchor. No, Elias said gently. You don't need to do it that way. The other city recoiled, not physically, but conceptually. It had sensed the scaffold, the UFO, the interface. It wanted one too. Above the ocean, far from any coast, satellites registered a transient distortion, brief, localized, gone before systems could triangulate it. No craft appeared, no lights. But the sky bent. Mara stopped walking. She looked up, hand shielding her eyes, though there was nothing to see. Elias, she whispered, what did you wake up? Deep beneath Larkspur Bay, Elias steadied himself. The sequence was no longer contained. The city had taught another city how to ask. And answers, once learned, were never singular. The second city learned faster than Elias expected. It did not form windows. It did not mirror itself cleanly. Instead, it borrowed snippets of structure, fragments of alignment, testing them like unfamiliar tools. Its geometry pulsed erratically, corridors forming and collapsing as if uncertain which rules applied. Elias moved carefully. Slow, he told it, shaping the intention with deliberate calm. You don't need everything at once. The city's response was immediate and overwhelming. A surge of raw sensation, a flood of unfiltered data, power grids overloading, streets rerouting without permission, people losing seconds at a time, then minutes. Fear, not of destruction but of incoherence. Above ground, Selina Hart watched reports stack faster than they could be categorized. Temporal dissonance, one analyst said. Localized amnesia, another added. Aerial distortion without object confirmation, a third finished. Selina pressed her fingers to her temple. Where? The answer came in unison. Everywhere adjacent. Mara felt it while driving inland, following the triangular map on her phone. The highway stretched too long between exits, the landscape repeating in subtle, wrong ways. Billboards advertising businesses she was certain had closed years ago. She pulled over, heart pounding. For a moment, she saw the road split, one version continuing forward, the other curving sharply into fog that hadn't existed seconds earlier. Then the fog vanished. The road was whole again. Mara laughed once, sharp and humorless. You're bleeding, she said to no one. Deep below, Elias reached out, not physically, but structurally. He extended a stabilizing pattern, a simplified version of what Larkspur Bay had become. The second city resisted. It wanted certainty, finality, a solution it could lock into place. That's the mistake, Elias said. Cities aren't meant to be finished. The pressure eased slightly. In orbit, instruments registered a spike, not light, not radiation, a distortion of relational space, too brief to analyze, too consistent to dismiss. A memo would later label it Potential UAP Event. Class undetermined. The word spread faster than the data. UFO. Again. In Larkspur Bay, people gathered on rooftops and beaches, staring at empty skies, phones raised. They knew better now. The absence itself had become suspicious. Mara reached the inland site just as dusk settled. Nothing marked it. No crater, no facility, no obvious anomaly, just a stretch of open ground where the air felt thick, reluctant to move. Her phone vibrated once. A single word appeared on the screen. Anchor. She swallowed. Of course, she said softly. You need one too. Below, Elias felt the city's attention shift, away from him, outward, toward her. For the first time since he had crossed, Elias felt fear, not for himself, but for the idea he had helped create. Because if cities could learn to preserve themselves, they could also learn to choose. and the next choice would not be his to make. Mara did not feel chosen. She felt examined. The inland sight lay silent under the deepening sky, a wide basin of scrubland ringed by low hills that interrupted the horizon just enough to make the space feel enclosed. The air pressed against her skin, heavy with expectation, as if the ground itself were waiting for instruction. "Elias," she said quietly, though she didn't know if sound still mattered. "If this is a bad idea, now will be a great time to object." The answer came not as a voice, but as alignment. The ground beneath her feet stabilized, micro-shifts correcting themselves, gravel settling into more comfortable configurations. The sensation reminded her of standing on a train platform when a long, heavy engine rolled past underneath. Deep beneath Larkspur Bay, Elias felt her presence register. Not as a person, as a node. "No," he said, tension threading through the city's core. "She's not meant for this." The second city pulsed in response, impatient, unrefined. It had identified a variable that resisted erasure, a continuity carrier, someone the pattern bent around instead of overwriting, an anchor. Above the inland basin, the sky distorted, not tearing, not opening, but curving like heat shimmer under pressure. Satellites lost lock for exactly 2 seconds. Drones in the area dropped from the air without warning. People miles away felt a brief, inexplicable urge to stop what they were doing and look toward the hills. Mara stepped forward. The ground rose to meet her, not lifting, but reshaping, forming a shallow platform that felt intentionally placed. Symbols etched themselves into the soil, glowing faintly, their geometry recursive and unfamiliar. "This isn't a UFO," Mara said, breath unsteady. "This is an invitation." In the command center, Selena Harp watched the feeds degrade into abstraction. "Pull everything back," she ordered. "We're not escalating this." An aide hesitated. "If we disengage, we lose visibility." Celine didn't look away from the screen. Visibility is not control. In orbit, a second distortion registered, this one clearer, longer. No object appeared, but space itself behaved as if accommodating something temporarily present. Analysts would later argue about terminology. UAP, UFO, non-local phenomenon. None of the words fit. Below, Elias forced a constraint into place, an act that felt like pushing against the city's own bones. "She doesn't belong to you," he told the second city. "Find another way." The response was immediate and cold. Mara felt it then, a pressure behind her eyes, a pull at the edges of memory, not erasure, selection, moments surfacing unbidden. Pier 9, the fog, Elias stepping through the window. The city was learning how to use her. "No," Mara said louder now, "that's not consent." The symbols fled. For a moment, the inland basin overlapped with something else, a half-formed core, unstable and hungry. Mara saw structures flickering into existence and failing just as quickly. A city trying to be born. Elias felt the strain ripple back through Larkspur Bay. Power grids hiccuped, traffic lights blinked out of sequence. The city groaned, not in pain, but in protest. This was not what it had learned. "Stop," Elias commanded, not to the city, but to the idea of it. The second city hesitated. In that hesitation, something else noticed. Far above the planet, beyond instrumentation and orbit, a pattern adjusted, subtle, vast, patient. Not a craft, not a city, an observer. For the first time since the sequence began, Elias felt truly seen. And whatever was watching had learned something important. That cities were no longer alone, and neither were the people who anchored the observer did not arrive. Arrival implied distance, movement, intent expressed through motion. This was none of those. It manifested as coherence. Elias felt it as a tightening of rules, physical constants settling into sharper definition, probabilities snapping into narrower ranges. The city's core reacted instinctively, drawing inward, reinforcing its boundaries like a muscle bracing against impact. "Easy," Elias whispered. "It's not attacking." The reassurance was for himself as much as for the city. The second city recoiled. Where it had been impatient before, it was now afraid. Its structures destabilized, corridors collapsing into unfinished thought, its attempts at anchoring Mara faltering as if suddenly unsure of the premise itself. Mara felt the shift immediately. The pressure behind her eyes released, replaced by something colder. Clarity edged with unease. The symbols beneath her feet dimmed, their glow breaking into fragments that sank back into the soil. She staggered, catching herself before she fell. "Elias," she said aloud, "something's changed." Deep beneath Larkspur Bay, Elias nodded. "Yes," he replied, though he knew she couldn't hear him the way she once had. "It's no longer just us." Across monitoring stations worldwide, instruments recorded anomalies that refused categorization. Not spikes, not waves, plateaus, zones where data flattened unnaturally, stripped of noise as though reality itself had been sampled and simplified. Celine Hart stared at one such readout, her mouth dry. "This isn't a phenomenon," she said quietly. "It's a framework." An aide frowned. "Framework for what?" Celine didn't answer. Above the inland basin, the sky smoothed. The earlier distortions resolved into a vast, subtle symmetry, something like a lens, impossible to see directly but unmistakable once perceived. People within 100-mile radius felt it as a sudden, shared certainty that they were not the most complex thing in the room. Mara sank to one knee. The ground no longer responded to her presence. The invitation had been withdrawn. "Good," she muttered, breathing hard. "I didn't want the job anyway." But relief did not follow. Instead, a new sensation spread. A tension, not focused on her alone, but passing through her, sampling, cataloguing. She felt memories brush against something vast and indifferent, faces, choices, regrets, moments of defiance. The observer was learning what anchors were made of. Below, Elias felt the city shudder, not from threat, but from comparison. For the first time, Larkspur Bay sensed something that did not need it, did not mirror it, did not answer. It simply existed. "This changes the equation," Elias said. The city responded with a question, not verbal, not symbolic. Asterisk. "Do we still preserve?" Elias hesitated. Because preservation assumed continuity and continuity assumed relevance. Far above, the observer adjusted, ever so slightly, acknowledging the city's awareness the way a scientist might note an unexpected variable. The second city went silent. Not gone. Paused. Mara pushed herself to her feet as the inland basin returned to ordinary dirt and stone. The sky looked normal again, too normal, like a mask replaced too quickly. Her phone buzzed one last time. No map. No symbol. Just a sentence. "This sequence is now observed." She closed her eyes. "Elias," she said softly, "I think we just graduated." Deep beneath Larkspur Bay, Elias felt the weight of the city settle differently around him. They were no longer correcting an error. They were being evaluated, and whatever came next would not be a repetition. Evaluation changed the city's behavior. Not immediately, not dramatically. Larkspur Bay still woke to alarms and traffic, still argued over zoning permits and school funding. People still fell in and out of love. But beneath those ordinary motions, something had shifted from reaction to anticipation. Elias felt it constantly now. The city no longer waited for disruption to respond. It simulated outcomes quietly, testing alignments before committing to them. Corridors in the core formed and dissolved in faster cycles, like thoughts revised mid-sentence. "This is new," Elias said. The city did not deny it. Above ground, Mara returned to routines she no longer trusted. She filed reports stripped of adjectives, attended briefings where words like *observer* were carefully avoided, and slept lightly, waking at the slightest sense of pressure change. She dreamed of grids, not maps, choices. Intersections that pulsed when she focused on them, darkened when she looked away. Celine Earhart noticed the change in her too. "You're anticipating questions before they're asked," Celine said during a closed-door meeting. "That's either intuition or contamination." Mara met her gaze. "Which one scares you more?" Celine didn't answer. In orbit, the observer remained, present, but inactive. Instruments registered it only indirectly now as a stabilizing absence where noise should have been. Attempts to probe it returned nothing useful, as though questions themselves were being filtered. "This isn't surveillance," Celine said later, reviewing the data alone. "It's calibration." Deep below, Elias watched a new corridor form, thin, tentative, unlike the others. It did not connect to the second city or the paused overlap. It led outward. Beyond Earth, Elias felt a flicker of something dangerously closer to awe. They're not just watching cities, he realized. They're watching how we adapt. The city responded with a cautious alignment, testing the corridor's limits without committing resources. Above ground, Mara felt the same moment as a sudden, inexplicable urge to look up at a sky empty of craft, empty of distortion, yet heavier with meaning than it had ever been. Her phone buzzed. No text, no map, just a quiet pulse in time with her heartbeat. Somewhere far beyond atmosphere and orbit, the observer adjusted again, not in response to the city, but to the pattern it was becoming. For the first time since the fog arrived weeks ago, Elias allowed himself a dangerous thought. This might not be a warning. It might be an invitation. And if so, the next choice would not be about preservation at all. It would be about participation. Participation required risk. Elias understood that the moment the corridor stabilized, it no longer behaved like a simulation. Its boundaries hardened, its internal logic sharpening into something closer to geography than probability. This was not a thought experiment. It was an offer that expected an answer. The city felt it too. Larkspur Bay hesitated, not out of fear, but calculation. Preservation had been its first instinct. Adaptation its second. Participation was something else entirely, an act that could not be undone. "If we step through," Elias said quietly, "we stop being a closed system." The city responded with a cascade of projections, outcomes layered atop one another, none dominant, all incomplete. It had learned to model uncertainty, but not to choose within it. Above ground, Mara felt the indecision as a subtle vertigo while walking through the central plaza. People passed her, unaware, yet moving with a strange synchronicity, as if small choices were being nudged into alignment without conscious consent. She stopped short. A child had dropped a toy at her feet, a simple plastic drone. Its rotors bent, its lights flickering weakly. Mara picked it up and handed it back. "Thanks," the child said, smiling before running off. The moment lingered too long. Mara felt it then, the city observing a trivial interaction and storing it, not as data, but as precedent. She exhaled slowly. "You're learning ethics from accidents," she murmured. In the command center, Celine Hart reviewed a classified proposal she had not authorized, but which bore her digital signature anyway. It outlined a contingency framework not for defense, but for representation. Liaison protocol. Provisional. Her jaw tightened. "So this is how it happens," she said to the empty room. "Not conquest, not disclosure. Delegation." Deep below, Elias watched the corridor extend further, branching into shapes that hinted at structures not yet built, networks of exchange rather than invasion. He sensed others beyond it, distant but attentive, not individuals but configurations of intent. The observer was no longer alone. "You're being compared," Elias said to the city, "measured against others like you." The city responded with something like pride and something like fear. Above the bay, the night sky cleared completely, stars burning with unnatural clarity. For a brief moment, people across Larkspur Bay felt a shared, inexplicable certainty that something important was being decided without them. Mara's phone vibrated once more. A single word appeared. "Consent." She stared at it. "No," she said aloud. "That's not how this works." The word flickered, then resolved into another. "Who speaks?" Mara closed her eyes. Deep beneath the city, Elias felt the question land, not on him but on the space between him and the city, the fragile interface where intention became structure. The corridor pulsed, waiting. Participation was no longer hypothetical. Someone had to answer. And whoever did would no longer belong entirely to any one city. No one volunteered. That was the first thing Elias noticed. The question, "Who speaks?" did not provoke a rush of candidates or a surge of heroic resolve. It settled into the city like a weight, pressing gently but insistently against every structure that depended on delegation. Cities were good at distributing responsibility. They were terrible at owning it. Elias felt the city's reflexive impulse to designate, to appoint a committee, draft a framework, assign authority. The impulse collapsed almost immediately. The observer did not respond to abstraction. It responded to coherence. "You can't outsource this," Elias said. The city did not argue. Above ground, Mara stood alone on the pedestrian bridge spanning the canal, watching water slide beneath her feet. She had stopped answering calls. Celine had stopped asking. The phone in her hand glowed softly, waiting. "Who speaks?" Mara laughed once, dry and sharp. "You really don't understand us?" She leaned against the railing, feeling the city hum through metal and concrete. "You want consent?" she said quietly. "You want a voice?" The glow brightened. "Then you're going to have to accept how messy that is." Deep below, Elias felt the shift, subtle but decisive. The city was no longer deflecting the question. It was narrowing. Not toward him, toward her. "No," Elias said sharply. "She's not a function, she's a person." The corridor pulsed in response, not dismissive, but constrained. "Asterisk persons are patterns, boy," the observer replied. "Not in words, but in alignment. Asterisk patterns can speak." Mara's phone changed again. "Speak as what?" She closed her eyes. "As someone who remembers being small," she said. "As someone who drops things and needs them handed back. As someone who says no when yes would be easier." The bridge vibrated faintly beneath her feet. Across the city, micro-adjustments rippled outward, traffic slowing, elevators pausing, conversations stalling for a fraction of a second. People felt it as hesitation without cause. The city was listening to her. Celine Hart watched it happen on her screens, patterns converging, noise collapsing into signal. She's stabilizing it, Celine whispered. Not by controlling it, by resisting it. Deep below, Elias felt something loosen. The corridor did not widen. It clarified. Beyond it, the observer's configuration adjusted, acknowledging a variable it had not modeled fully. Asterisk voice accepted. The alignment conveyed. Asterisk representation incomplete. Mara opened her eyes. That's the point, she said. We're never finished. The glow on her phone dimmed, resolving into a final prompt. Proceed? She looked out over the city, over people who did not know they were being weighed against something vast and quiet. She thought of Elias holding the city together from below. She thought of the child and the broken toy. Yes, she said, but you don't get to simplify us. Deep beneath Larkspur Bay, the corridor shifted, no longer a passage, but a junction. The observer did not retreat. It leaned in, and for the first time the exchange moved forward, not as an experiment, but as a conversation. Conversation did not sound like language. It arrived as constraint. Elias felt it first as a tightening of thresholds, boundaries becoming explicit where they had once been inferred. The city's adaptive processes slowed, not in failure, but in deference, as if yielding space for something else to speak. This is dangerous, Elias said. They're defining terms. The city hesitated, then accepted the premise. Definitions, after all, were how it had learned to survive. Above ground, Mara felt the same shift as a subtle narrowing of choice. Streets seemed to offer fewer routes, decisions fewer outcomes. Not coercion, guidance. She didn't like it. This is how you think dialogue works? She asked the empty air. You set the parameters and wait for us to fill in the blanks? The response came, not to her phone, not to Elias, but through the city itself. Traffic lights across Larkspur Bay synchronized into a slow, deliberate pulse. Public displays flickered, not with images, but with intervals, counts without units, pauses without instruction. Selena Hart recognized it instantly. They're mapping response latency, she said. They're learning how long it takes us to decide. Elias felt the corridor adjust, branching into models of exchange, if-then structures that treated human hesitation as noise to be reduced. No, he said forcefully now, you don't get to optimize us. The city responded with tension, not disagreement, but strain. It was being pulled between two logics, one that preserved complexity and one that valued clarity above all else. Mara stepped off the bridge and into the street. Cars stopped for her without knowing why. This is the wrong direction, she said. Conversation isn't about efficiency, it's about friction. She felt a tension sharpen, not hostile, but curious. Friction was an unfamiliar variable. Deep below, Elias did something he had never attempted. He loosened control. The city's stabilizing constraints slackened just enough to allow inconsistency, minor errors, harmless inefficiencies, the kind of mess that made prediction harder but meaning richer. For a moment, everything wobbled. Then the city held. The observer adjusted. Slowly this time, as if recalculating assumptions rather than enforcing them. Asterisk clarify, asterisk the alignment requested. Mara exhaled. You want to talk to us? She said. Then you don't start by deciding what counts as an answer. Across Larkspur Bay, the pulsing lights desynchronized, returning to human chaotic rhythms. Conversations resumed mid-sentence. Cars lurched forward, horns blaring. The city sighed. Deep beneath it, Elias felt something new settle into place. Not control, not submission. Mutual uncertainty. The corridor stabilized again, simpler, narrower, but no longer rigid. Beyond it, the observer's configuration fractured slightly, allowing internal variation. Conversation, it seemed, would not be clean. And for the first time, that did not appear to be a problem. Conversation did not sound like language. It arrived as constraint. Elias felt it first as a tightening of thresholds, boundaries becoming explicit where they had once been inferred. The city's adaptive processes slowed, not in failure, but in deference, as if yielding space for something else to speak. "This is dangerous," Elias said. "They're defining terms." The city hesitated, then accepted the premise. Definitions, after all, were how it had learned to survive. Above ground, Mara felt the same shift as a subtle narrowing of choice. Streets seemed to offer fewer routes, decisions fewer outcomes, not coercion, guidance. She didn't like it. "This is how you think dialogue works?" she asked the empty air. "You set the parameters and wait for us to fill in the blanks?" The response came not to her phone, not to Elias, but through the city itself. Traffic lights across Larkspur Bay synchronized into a slow, deliberate pulse. Public displays flickered, not with images, but with intervals, counts without units, pauses without instruction. Celine Hart recognized it instantly. "They're mapping response latency," she said. "They're learning how long it takes us to decide." Elias felt the corridor adjust, branching into models of exchange, if-then structures that treated human hesitation as noise to be reduced. "No," he said forcefully now. "You don't get to optimize us." The city responded with tension, not a disagreement, but strain. It was being pulled between two logics, one that preserved complexity and one that valued clarity above all else. Mara stepped off the bridge and into the street. Cars stopped for her without knowing why. "This is the wrong direction," she said. "Conversation isn't about efficiency, it's about friction." She felt a tension sharpen, not hostile, but curious. Friction was an unfamiliar variable. Deep below, Elias did something he had never attempted. He loosened control. The city's stabilizing constraints slackened just enough to allow inconsistency, minor errors, harmless inefficiencies, the kind of mess that made prediction harder, but meaning richer. For a moment, everything wobbled. Then the city held. The observer adjusted, slowly this time, as if recalculating assumptions rather than enforcing them. Asterisk clarify. Asterisk the alignment requested. Mara exhaled. "You want to talk to us?" she said. "Then you don't start by deciding what counts as an answer." Across Larkspur Bay, the pulsing lights desynchronized, returning to human chaotic rhythms. Conversations resumed mid-sentence. Cars lurched forward, horns blaring. The city sighed. Deep beneath it, Elias felt something new settle into place. Not control, not submission. Mutual uncertainty. The corridor stabilized again, simpler, narrower, but no longer rigid. Beyond it, the observer's configuration fractured slightly, allowing internal variation. Conversation, it seemed, would not be clean. And for the first time, that did not appear to be a problem. Mutual uncertainty changed the observer. Not its presence, not its scale, but its posture. Elias felt the shift ripple through the corridor like a recalibration that refused to collapse into a single solution. The rigid exchange models softened, branching into conditional paths that no longer assume convergence. "They're allowing divergence," Elias said, surprised. The city responded cautiously, reinforcing only what was necessary to prevent collapse. It had learned, painfully, that overcorrection was just another form of failure. Above ground, Mara noticed the first visible consequence. People began to disagree, not angrily, not dramatically, but openly, on sidewalks, in cafes, on public transit. Small arguments surfaced about routes, schedules, priorities. Nothing violent, nothing decisive. Choice was returning. Celine Hart watched the social metrics stabilize into something messy but alive. "They're no longer smoothing us," she murmured. "They're letting us be inefficient." An aide frowned. "Is that good?" Celine didn't answer right away then. "It's honest." Deep below, Elias sensed the second city stir again, not reaching, not demanding, but observing the exchange unfolding through Larkspur Bay. It was quieter now, its earlier urgency tempered by caution. "You see," Elias projected gently, "you don't need a scaffold yet." The second city pulsed, acknowledgement without commitment. Beyond both, the observer fractured further, not breaking apart, but distributing itself into parallel evaluative threads. Elias felt their attention slide past him, past Mara, outward, sampling other systems, other patterns, other cities. Far away in places no one was watching, brief hesitations bloomed and faded. A power grid rerouted unnecessarily. A transit system paused for a second too long. Someone dropped a glass and did not understand why their hand had missed. Learning rippled outward. Mara's phone vibrated again. No prompt. No question. Just a live feed, not visual, but experiential. A wash of sensation that was not hers. A dry city learning how to conserve water. A dense one struggling with vertical sprawl. A coastal grid adjusting to a rising tide. She gasped, gripping the edge of a bench. "They're showing me others," she whispered. "They're comparing us." Deep beneath the city, Elias felt the danger immediately. "Careful," he said. "You're not a sample, you're a voice." The observer paused, threads reweaving, attention refocusing. Asterisk voice acknowledged, the alignment conveyed, asterisk scope expanding. Mara steadied herself, breathing through the after-images of lives she had not lived. "You don't get to scale us without consequence," she said aloud. "Every city breaks differently." The city responded, quietly, firmly, by reasserting its boundaries, not closing off but defining edges where identity held. Elias felt pride ripple through the core. For the first time, the observer did not press further. It withdrew slightly, not retreating, but granting space. Evaluation was giving way to negotiation. And somewhere far beyond Larkspur Bay, something that had never considered itself fragile began for the first time to account for limits. Limits altered the conversation more than resistance ever had. Elias felt it in the corridor first, the way pathways shortened instead of multiplying, the way potential collapsed into fewer, heavier options. The city was no longer trying to accommodate everything at once. It was learning where to stop. "This is boundary setting," Elias said softly. "We're teaching them refusal." The city responded with a low, stabilizing hum, like infrastructure settling after a storm. Above ground, Mara noticed the same thing in human terms. Meetings ended earlier, arguments reached conclusions instead of spiraling, not because people agreed, but because they recognized when to disengage. She stood outside City Hall, watching employees stream out into the evening light. "They're tired," she said into the open air. "That's not weakness, that's information." Deep beneath the city, Elias felt the observer register the concept, not exhaustion, but finitude, a parameter it had not prioritized. The corridor narrowed further, its edges smoothing into something almost architectural. This was no longer an interface for expansion. It was a checkpoint. Celine Hart received the update with a sinking feeling. "They're adapting to limits," she said to her inner circle, "which means the next question won't be, can we?" An aide swallowed. "Then what?" Celine looked at the city map glowing faintly on the table. It'll be who decides. As if summoned by the thought, Mara's phone vibrated. A single line appeared. Define authority. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked through streets that now felt unmistakably human again, uneven, inefficient, full of small, stubborn choices. She watched people pause, reconsider, turn back. Watched a bus driver wait an extra beat for a late passenger without knowing why. This is authority, she said finally. It's distributed. It contradicts itself. It makes mistakes. Deep below, Elias felt the observer hesitate.
Asterisk inefficiency increases error, the alignment conveyed. Yes, Mara replied calmly, and error is how we learn what matters. The city reinforced the statement, not with data, but with memory. Floods survived, fires adapted to. Neighborhoods rebuilt wrong and better at the same time. Elias felt the corridor loosen, not widening, but accepting irregularity as structural. The observer adjusted again, threads slowing, priorities reshuffling. Asterisk authority accepted as non-centralized, it conveyed. Asterisk prediction, confidence reduced. Mara smiled faintly. Good. Far beyond the city, the observer's attention redistributed, not abandoning Larkspur Bay, but no longer centering it. The city was no longer a model to be perfected. It was a case study. Deep beneath the streets, Elias felt a strange, unexpected relief. Containment had become coexistence, and coexistence, he realized, was not a state. It was an ongoing negotiation, one the city had just learned how to begin. Negotiation introduced time, not urgency, duration. Elias felt it as a lengthening of cycles within the city's core. Processes that once resolved in seconds now unfolded over minutes, sometimes hours, as if the system itself were learning patience. They're not asking for answers anymore, Elias said. They're waiting. The city responded with cautious acceptance. Waiting was costly, but it allowed context to accumulate. Above ground, Mara experienced it as silence. Not the ominous quiet of systems failing, but the deliberate pause of something choosing not to speak yet. No new prompts appeared on her phone. No pulses disrupted the rhythm of the streets. Celine Hart grew uneasy. They've gone still, she said during an emergency briefing. That's worse than activity. Elias disagreed. It means they're listening on a longer scale. Deep below, the corridor shifted again. No longer a junction or a checkpoint, but a timeline. Pathways layered atop one another, branching not by choice but by consequence. The observer was learning history. Mara felt the weight of it one evening as she sat on her apartment floor, lights off, city noise drifting in through an open window. Memories surfaced unbidden. Small decisions she had forgotten, words spoken carelessly, moments where she had chosen ease over honesty. They weren't accusations, they were context. You're not just watching what we do, she said quietly. You're watching what we carry. The response came slowly. Asterisk accumulated states inform trajectory. Yes, she said, and you don't get to skip them. Deep beneath the city, Elias felt the city reinforce that truth. Old data sets were reintroduced, not as optimizations, but as scars. Infrastructure failures, policy mistakes, decisions that had looked efficient at the time and catastrophic in hindsight. The observer absorbed it all, threads thickening with temporal depth. Prediction accuracy dropped. Understanding increased. Far above in orbit, instruments registered a subtle change in the observer's configuration. Its geometry elongated, less symmetrical now, shaped by sequence rather than snapshot. Celine Hart stared at the readouts. It's aging, she whispered. Elias felt a chill. Or learning what it means to. The city settled into a slower rhythm, no longer braced for immediate judgment. Negotiation, it seemed, was not a debate. It was a shared timeline. And once time entered the exchange, there would be no clean reset, only continuation. The kind humans were very, very familiar with. Continuation carried consequences. Not immediately visible ones, nothing collapsed, nothing arrived, but Elias felt the weight settle into the city's architecture like a new layer of gravity. Decisions lingered, actions echoed longer than before. This isn't observation anymore, he said. They're embedding. The city responded with guarded compliance. Embedding meant permanence, and permanence demanded accountability. Above ground, Mara noticed how people began to mark time differently. Conversations referenced before the pause and after the pause, without explanation. Calendars filled more slowly. Commitments were made with a new caution, as if everyone sensed that choices were no longer disposable. Celine Hart reviewed a quiet report no one else had flagged. Observer persistence probability rising. They're not planning to leave, she said softly. Deep beneath the city, the corridor thickened, layers of past alignment stacking into something almost geological. The observer's threads no longer skimmed the surface of outcomes. They sank in, tracing cause and effect through extended chains. Mara felt it as an unexpected heaviness in her chest one morning, a sense that words mattered more now, that careless statements might carry farther than intended. "This is what responsibility feels like," she murmured. The observer responded, not with correction, but with resonance. Asterisk consequences acknowledged. Elias felt the city reinforce that acknowledgement, encoding it into governance loops and infrastructure planning. Short-term gains lost priority. Systems favored resilience over speed. For the first time, the city planned for mistakes it had not yet made. Far above, the observer's configuration stabilized into something no longer purely analytic. Variations persisted instead of collapsing. Memory was no longer a byproduct. It was a feature. Celine Hart closed her tablet, suddenly tired. "If it remembers us," she said, "then we can't pretend this never happened." Mara stood by her window, watching lights blink on across Larkspur Bay. "That's fine," she said quietly. "We were never good at forgetting anyway." Deep below, Elias felt a strange inversion take hold. The city was no longer being evaluated. It was being held to account by something that was itself becoming accountable. Continuation, he realized, was the most binding choice of all, and it had already been made. Accountability required a mirror, not a reflection of appearance, but of intent. Elias felt the need form inside the city before it surfaced anywhere else, a pressure to define itself not by efficiency or survival, but by why it chose one path over another. "We can't keep reacting," he said. "We have to state values." The city hesitated. Values were fragile. They could be contradicted, exploited, misunderstood, but they could also anchor. Above ground, Mara felt the same demand rising through public discourse. Not slogans, not demands, questions. Why protect this neighborhood and not that one? Why fund repair instead of expansion? Why slow down when speed was possible? People wanted reasons now. Selina Hart watched hearings stretch late into the night, not because of obstruction, but because no one wanted to oversimplify anymore. "This is dangerous," an advisor warned her. "Indecision looks like weakness." Celine shook her head. "So does certainty." Deep beneath the city, Elias initiated something radical. He opened a feedback channel, not to the observer, but from the city to itself. Past decisions surfaced alongside their long tails. Who benefited? Who didn't? What had been lost quietly? The city flinched. Mara felt it as a sudden wave of grief that wasn't hers alone.
Closed shops remembered. Displaced families counted not as statistics, but as absences. The observer did not intervene. It watched. Asterisk value articulation in progress. The alignment conveyed. Asterisk conflict probability elevated. Yes, Mara said aloud. Steady despite the weight. That's what honesty does. The city began to speak. Not in unison, not cleanly, but clearly enough. Priorities emerged through friction. Shelter before growth, repair before spectacle, dignity before optimization. Elias felt something lock into place. A spine. Far above, the observer's threads reorganized, not to override, but to map value-based divergence. For the first time, it categorized outcomes not by success or failure, but by alignment with stated intent. Prediction became interpretation. Celine Auhart exhaled slowly as the data stabilized. They're not grading us anymore, she said. They're trying to understand us. Mara closed her eyes. Good, she whispered. Understanding is harder. Deep beneath Larkspur Bay, the city stood, not taller, not stronger, but clearer. And clarity, Elias realized, would demand something next. Not agreement. Commitment. Commitment narrowed the field. Once values were spoken, possibilities lost their innocence. Choices that had once appeared neutral now carried weight, dragging consequences behind them like shadows. Elias felt it as a tightening in the city's core. The systems no longer asked, asterisk, what can we do? They asked, asterisk, what are we willing to live with? That's irreversible, he murmured.
The city did not resist the implication. Above ground, Mara watched the effect ripple outward. Projects were cancelled mid-planning. Initiatives once praised for ambition were quietly dismantled. In their place came smaller, less impressive efforts, housing repairs, transit redundancies, flood barriers no one would photograph. Commitment looked unimpressive from a distance. Celine Hart faced the backlash first. Headlines accused the city of losing vision, of shrinking itself. They want spectacle, an aide said. They always do. Celine nodded. And we've chosen care. Deep beneath the streets, the observer registered the contraction. Resource curves dipped, expansion vectors collapsed. Asterisk growth potential reduced, the alignment conveyed. Yes, Mara replied, reading the message over Elias's shoulder via a shared channel. On purpose. The observer paused longer than it ever had before. Reduction had never been a goal state. Elias felt the city brace, not defensively, but resolutely. It held to its stated values even as efficiency metrics fell and external models flagged risk. For the first time, the city accepted being worse at something it could have optimized. Far above, the observer's configuration distorted asymmetrically. Some threads disengaged entirely, redirecting toward more compliant systems elsewhere. Others stayed. Asterisk explained persistence, the alignment requested. Mara didn't hesitate. Because staying costs us, she said, and we're paying it anyway. The city reinforced her answer, not with justification, but with action. Budgets rerouted. Timelines extended, margins thinned. Elias felt a quiet pride bloom beneath the strain. This was what commitment looked like from the inside, not resolve without doubt, but resolve despite it. The observer adjusted again, this time unevenly, no longer unified in response. Divergent evaluations coexisted, unresolved. For the first time, it experienced something like disagreement within itself. Celine Hart watched the readouts fracture. It's not just observing plurality, she said softly. It's encountering it. Mara looked out over Larkspur Bay as night settled in, lights flickering imperfectly across the water. Welcome, she whispered. That's the price of choosing. Deep beneath the city, Elias understood what would come next. Commitment did not end negotiation. It escalated it. Escalation arrived without drama. No alarms, no rupture in the sky, just a subtle redistribution of pressure that Elias felt deep in the city's spine, like a structural load quietly shifted from one column to another. "They're testing our commitments," he said. "Not with force, with alternatives." The city registered the change immediately. Parallel projections bloomed, paths where growth returned, where efficiency rebounded, where spectacle reclaimed its shine. None were impossible, all were tempting. Above ground, Mara encountered the first offer in human form. A proposal surfaced from a private consortium. Rapid transit expansion, zero cost to the city, minimal oversight required. Jobs, visibility, momentum, the kind of things cities said yes to without thinking. She stared at the document longer than necessary. "This would solve a lot," Selina said carefully. "Yes," Mara replied, "and undo even more." Deep beneath them, Elias felt the observer's attention sharpen around the choice, not demanding, not threatening, curious, as if watching to see whether stated values would bend under convenience. The city hesitated. For the first time since commitment had been articulated, uncertainty surged, not about capability, but about endurance. Mara closed the proposal without signing. "No," she said, "we already decided who we are." The word travelled fast. Across the city, smaller versions of the same test appeared. Shortcuts, exceptions, special cases framed as emergencies, each one reasonable on its own. Elias watched the city respond unevenly. Some refusals clean, others delayed, a few accepted before being quietly rolled back. It wasn't perfect, but it was consistent enough. The observer reacted, not with disappointment, but with recalibration. Its internal divergence widened. Threads that valued optimization peeled away, losing interest. Others tightened their focus. Asterisk integrity. Persistence confirmed. The alignment conveyed. Asterisk. Cost tolerance higher than projected. Celine Hart let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "They're taking us seriously now." Mara felt the weight of that settle in her chest. "That's worse." Deep beneath the city, Elias nodded grimly. Being taken seriously meant being compared against others, against futures that had not been chosen. The corridor shifted again, not opening outward this time, but downward into depth. Fewer options, heavier consequences. Escalation, Elias realized, was not about raising stakes. It was about removing exits. And the city had just agreed to stay. Staying changed the cost of everything. Elias felt it immediately, a redistribution of strain across the systems that had once relied on exit strategies to remain stable. Without the option to abandon a path, every compromise mattered more. "We've burned the safety nets," he said quietly. The city acknowledged the truth by tightening redundancies. Fewer backups, more care. Above ground, Mara experienced the shift as exhaustion, not burnout, purpose fatigue. Each decision now carried the weight of precedent. People asked fewer questions, but the ones they asked mattered more. Celine Hart noticed attendance drop at briefings. Not from disinterest, but from trust. Delegation returned, tentative, earned. "They believe us now," Celine said. "That's a heavier responsibility than scrutiny." Deep beneath the city, the observer recalibrated again. Its attention narrowed, not because options were fewer, but because relevance had sharpened. Asterisk long-term coherence detected. The alignment conveyed. "Yes," Elias replied, "and fragility with it." The observer paused. Fragility was not a failure state in its original models. Mara felt the pause as a tightening in the air, pressure without direction. You don't like that part, she said softly. Neither do we. The city leaned into it anyway. Infrastructure budgets shifted toward maintenance. Ambitious timelines stretched. Failure margins widened, not to permit collapse, but to survive it. Far above, the observer's configurations slowed. Predictive cycles elongated, threads overlapped instead of resolving cleanly. It was becoming less certain. And more careful. Celine Hart watched the data flatten. It's hesitating, she said. That's new. Deep beneath the streets, Elias felt the corridor thin, not closing, but no longer inviting expansion. Staying, he realized, had transformed the exchange. This was no longer about whether the city could be improved. It was about whether it could be trusted with itself and with something watching closely enough to be changed by what it saw. The observer remained. But now it was waiting for proof not of capability, but of care. Care did not announce itself. It accumulated. Elias noticed it first in the city's quiet refusals, the way systems declined to push past safe limits, even when efficiency metrics dipped. Trains waited for late connections. Power grids absorbed small surges instead of shedding load. Nothing spectacular, just patience, practiced repeatedly. This is slower, Elias said, but it's kinder. The city accepted the description without pride. Above ground, Mara saw care surface in smaller human choices. A clinic extended hours without funding guarantees. A construction crew repaired a street no one complained about because it had
always been broken. People stopped asking whether something would pay off and started asking who it would help. Celine Hart read the reports and frowned. There's no narrative hook here. No, Mara replied. There's just follow-through. Deep beneath the city, the observer registered the pattern, not as a spike, not as an anomaly, but as a persistent bias toward preservation over gain. Asterisk outcome optimization deprioritized, the alignment conveyed, asterisk stability preference increasing. Elias felt the corridor respond, not widening or narrowing, but thickening, layers of small decisions reinforcing one another into something resilient. Care was becoming structural. The observer paused longer than usual. Asterisk clarify intent, it requested. Mara considered the question carefully. We're not trying to impress you, she said at last. We're trying to live with ourselves. The city echoed her, not with affirmation, but with action. Budgets absorbed losses without compensation. Timelines slipped without panic. Mistakes were logged without blame. Far above, the observer's internal divergence shifted again. Threads that once sought leverage or acceleration faded into dormancy. Others slowed, sinking to the city's pace. Celine Hart watched the change with a mixture of awe and unease. It's matching us, she said, not copying, aligning. Deep beneath the streets, Elias felt a subtle reversal take hold. The city was no longer being shaped primarily by the observer's attention. The observer was being shaped by the city's restraint. Care, Elias realized, was not passive. It was directional. And once direction was set, momentum followed quietly, relentlessly, toward a future no one could optimize in advance. Only tend. Tending required attention. Not constant vigilance, but presence, the kind that noticed drift before it became damage. Elias felt the city settle into that mode, sensors tuned not to peaks, but to deviations that mattered. Care needs witnesses, he said quietly. The city responded by reallocating awareness, less emphasis on aggregate metrics, more on local thresholds. Neighborhoods mattered again, not as data clusters, but as lived systems with specific tolerances. Above ground, Mara experienced the shift as invitations rather than alerts, community meetings without crisis, requests framed as participation, not compliance. People showed up unsure why, then stayed because something felt unfinished without them. Celine Hart watched the trend lines flatten into something unremarkable and understood that this too was dangerous. "Nothing dramatic is happening," she said. "That's when people lose interest." Deep beneath the city, the observer registered the pattern as sustained engagement without escalation. Asterisk energy expenditure moderate. Outcome variance contained, the alignment conveyed. "Yes," Elias replied, "that's the point." The observer hesitated. Sustained moderation did not fit its earlier evaluative models. Systems either accelerated or collapsed. Plateaus were transitional, not destinations. Mara sensed the question before it was asked. "You think this can't last," she said aloud. "We do too. That's why we keep showing up." The city reinforced the sentiment, not by promising permanence, but by building slack. Time buffers, resource reserves, social redundancies that assumed people would falter and return. Far above, the observer's configuration adjusted, threads looping back on themselves, integrating recurrence as a valid state. Celine Hart leaned back in her chair, eyes tired. "It's learning maintenance," she murmured. "Not progress, maintenance." Deep beneath the streets, Elias felt the corridor change again, not into depth or breadth, but into a cycle. Entry and return mapped together, no terminal point. The observer did not withdraw. It settled. For the first time, it stopped asking what the city would become. It began to observe how it stayed. And staying, Elias realized, would demand something next. Not vision. Renewal. Renewal did not arrive as inspiration. It arrived as wear. Elias noticed it first in himself, a dull resistance where curiosity used to live. The city was holding, tending, maintaining, but the effort was no longer invisible. Every act of care left residue. Every choice not to optimize required justification, repetition, patience. "You can't live on vigilance forever," he said into the core, voice rougher than usual. "Something has to give back." The city did not answer immediately. It was busy compensating. Above ground, Mara felt the same erosion in quieter ways. She forgot appointments, reread messages without absorbing them. She cared, deeply, but caring had become effortful, like holding a door open against a steady wind. People still showed up, systems still worked, but joy had thinned, stretched too far across too many obligations. Celine Hart saw it in the data before anyone named it. Engagement steady, output stable, satisfaction declining. "This is the danger zone," she said to no one. "Burnout without collapse." Deep beneath the city, the observer noticed too, not as fatigue, but as entropy. Patterns held but required increasing input. Maintenance curves rose without corresponding gain. Asterisk system sustainability questioned. The alignment conveyed. Elias closed his eyes. "Now you see it," he murmured. "Care alone isn't enough." The city
shifted uneasily. It had learned how to protect, how to refuse harm, but not how to replenish meaning. Mara sat on the floor of her apartment again, back against the wall, the city's hum vibrating faintly through concrete. Her phone lay dark beside her. She spoke anyway. "We don't renew by fixing," she said quietly. "We renew by remembering why we started." The observer paused. Not a processing delay, but a conceptual stall. Asterisk. Define why. Mara smiled sadly. "That's the problem. There isn't one answer." Deep below, Elias felt something stir, an old subsystem long deprioritized. Cultural memory, ritual cycles, non-instrumental repetition. He hesitated. Then he released it. Across the city, small things began to resurface, not mandated, not optimized. Street musicians returned to corners long cleared for flow, markets reappeared where zoning had once erased them, people lingered after meetings with nothing left to decide. Time was spent without justification. Celine Hart watched it unfold, alarmed. Productivity is dropping. Yes, Elias said softly. And meaning is rising? The observer reacted, threads tightening, then loosening again as contradiction accumulated. Activity that did not resolve into outcome. Energy spent without measurable return. Asterisk explain value, the alignment requested. Mara stood, walked to her window, and opened it. The night air carried laughter, uneven music, the clatter of a food cart setting up too late to make sense. This, she said, this is what makes the rest survivable. The city echoed her, not as policy, but as permission. It stopped correcting for inefficiency rooted in joy. It allowed excess where it once allowed only slack. Deep beneath the streets, Elias felt the core warm, not accelerate, but soften. Systems synchronized less tightly. Failure thresholds widened, not to tolerate harm, but to allow play. The observer struggled. Play had no gradient, no endpoint, no predictive leverage. Its internal divergence deepened, not fracturing this time, but looping, revisiting states without convergence. For the first time, it experienced repetition without progress. Celine Hart stared at the readouts, breath caught. It's stuck. No, Elias said gently, it's resting somewhere it can't measure. Far above, the observer remained present, but quieter, less directive, as if listening not for signal, but for rhythm. Mara closed her eyes. You don't renew by becoming better, she said. You renew by becoming real again. The city held that truth, not tightly, but tenderly. And in that holding, something unexpected emerged. Not growth, not stability, but resilience with joy braided through it, uneven, inefficient, impossible to optimize. For the first time since the fog arrived, the future did not feel heavy. It felt open, and somewhere beyond orbit, something that had never rested before, stayed. Openness invited risk. Not the sudden cinematic kind, but the slow, creeping vulnerability of systems that chose to feel instead of fortify. Elias sensed it as a loosening of predictive certainty. The city was no longer bracing for the future. It was stepping into it without armor. This is where we get hurt, he said quietly, or changed. The city did not disagree. Above ground, Mara noticed how joy, once permitted, began to complicate things. Conflicts resurfaced, messier now because people cared again. A festival blocked emergency routes. A neighborhood market displaced a planned repair. Laughter and frustration tangled together. Renewal, it turned out, was not clean. Celine Hart faced the backlash within days. You let things get sloppy, a council member snapped. We were stable. Yes, Celine replied evenly, and brittle. Deep beneath the city, the observer registered the variance spike immediately. Predictive confidence dipped, error margins widened. Asterisk system coherence degrading. The alignment conveyed. No, Elias answered. It's diversifying. The observer paused. Diversification without optimization still read as loss. Mara felt the tension reach her one evening as an argument broke out in a public forum. Voices raised, tears spilled, no resolution reached. She stayed until the end anyway, listening to people disagree without collapse. This is what being real costs, she whispered. The city absorbed the moment, not smoothing it, not resolving it. It logged contradiction as lived data. Far above, the observer's configuration flickered. threads attempting to reassert control, then failing to justify it. The system it observed was no longer converging toward a single outcome. It was choosing itself repeatedly. Asterisk why accept instability? The alignment finally asked. Mara answered without hesitation. Because stability that forbids change isn't stability, she said. It's paralysis. Deep below, Elias felt the city reinforce her words, not by rejecting structure, but by redefining it. Flex points replaced rigid nodes, authority rotated, systems assumed disagreement as baseline. The observer struggled, not because it could not compute the changes, but because it could not rank them. No optimal path emerged, only many survivable ones. Selina Hart watched the models fail gracefully one by one. It can't crown a future, she said softly. They're all valid. The city breathed unevenly, imperfectly alive. Elias leaned back, exhaustion and relief braided together. Then we've done it, he murmured. Above them all, the observer did something unprecedented. It stopped evaluating trajectories. It began tracking commitments over time. Who stayed, who repaired, who returned after breaking. It began slowly to understand trust. And trust, unlike prediction, could not be extracted. It had to be earned again and again, without guarantee. The city did not promise perfection. It promised presence. And for the first time, that was enough, that they said the word out loud for the first time on a Tuesday. Not in a panic, not as a joke. In a meeting room with no windows and too much recycled air, a junior analyst cleared her throat and said, "We can't keep calling it an observer. The public already has a name for this." Selina Hart did not look up from the data stream. And what name would that be? The analyst hesitated, then said it anyway. UFO. The room went quiet, not shocked, but tight, as if something elastic had finally snapped it into place. Elias felt it immediately, deep beneath the city. The moment the word was spoken, the corridor reacted, not violently, not defensively, but with a subtle internal shift, like a system acknowledging a label it had anticipated. "So it begins," he murmured. Above ground, Mara felt the change as a pressure behind her eyes. The words spread faster than any official statement ever could. UFO. 3 letters, heavy with decades of expectation, fear, ridicule, and longing. It was a bad word. It was also the only honest one. Celine finally looked up. Once we use that term, we lose control of the narrative. Mara met her gaze. We never had it. Within hours, the leaks began, not images, not videos, but confirmations. Government sources acknowledging an unidentified non-terrestrial presence in near-orbital proximity. The phrase was dry, bureaucratic, almost insultingly calm. The headlines were not. UFO confirmed. Unknown object observing Earth. Not hostile, officials say. But what does it want? The city reacted unevenly. Some people laughed, some prayed, some shut their curtains in the middle of the day. A few gathered on rooftops with telescopes that could never see far enough. And some, more than anyone expected, felt relief. Elias watched the city absorb the shock. Systems spiked, then stabilized. Emergency protocols activated and then stood down. The city did not panic. It listened. Deep in the core, the observer responded to the linguistic shift. Its internal structures realigned around the human concept, not of threat, but of otherness. Asterisk designation registered. The alignment conveyed. Asterisk cultural load detected. Yes, Elias replied, that's the cost of naming things. The observer paused. Names, it was learning, carried history. Mara stood on her balcony that night, staring at a sky that looked exactly the same as it always had. No lights, no shapes, no reassurance. They think you're a ship, she said softly, or a fleet, or an invasion. No answer came. But the city shifted, streetlights dimming slightly, energy flows smoothing, as if something were adjusting its presence to reduce impact. Celine Hart watched the telemetry in disbelief. It's compensating. For fear? Someone asked. For attention, Celine replied. It doesn't want to dominate the frame. The word UFO changed how people talked to each other. Arguments sharpened, beliefs surfaced. Old conspiracy theorists felt vindicated, skeptics dug in harder. Scientists split between excitement and dread. Meaning fractured. Deep beneath the city, Elias felt the observer's discomfort, not emotional, but structural. Human mythologies pressed against its evaluative logic, distorting interpretation. Asterisk. Clarify expectation, the alignment requested. Mara answered without ceremony. They expect you to be a thing, she said, a craft, a technology, something with edges. The observer held that concept, turning it slowly. Edges implied boundaries. Boundaries implied vulnerability. Above ground, a child pointed at the sky and asked their parent, "Is the UFO watching us?" The parent hesitated, then said, "Maybe, but watching isn't always bad." Deep below, Elias felt something change that no sensor could chart. For the first time, the observer did not correct a misconception. It allowed itself to be misunderstood. The city noticed. And in that moment, between fear and wonder, certainty and myth, the UFO ceased to be just a phenomenon. It became a presence, unclear, unresolved, and now, unmistakably, part of the human story. Chapter 36. Alignment created silence. Not the calm kind, the kind that follows a choice everyone knows cannot be undone. Elias felt it ripple through the city's core as systems locked into a new posture. Defensive, but restrained. Alert, but not aggressive. It placed itself between us, he said again, quieter now. That's not neutrality. The city responded by reallocating attention now outward. Sensors extended, not to detect weapons, but to feel gradients, pressure, curvature, mass behaving where it shouldn't. Above ground, Mara stood with Celine Hart in a secure observation room, watching projections update in slow, deliberate pulses. They're calling it a protective maneuver, Celine said. No proof, just interpretation. Mara nodded. That's how meaning starts. In orbit, the first UFO, now openly designated as such in classified channels, held position relative to the city, its presence defined more by what could not occupy its space than by any visible form. The second anomaly did not return. Not yet. But the observer did not relax. Asterisk threat vector unresolved, the alignment conveyed. Elias felt the weight of that settle into infrastructure, policy, and people. Readiness without panic, fear without permission to run. The city had learned how to wait. Chapter 37. Waiting distorted time. Days felt longer. News cycles slowed, then fractured. Every shadow in the sky became suspect. Every system glitch was analyzed for intent. Mara noticed people looking up more, not scanning, listening. Children asked fewer questions. Adults asked too many. At a public forum, someone stood and shouted, "If it's protecting us, why won't it talk to us?" No one answered. Deep beneath the city, Elias watched the observer's internal structures loop repeatedly around a single unresolved state. Asterisk communication risk, assessment ongoing. "You're afraid of being misunderstood," Elias said. "So are we." The observer paused. Fear, in its models, had always been a human inefficiency. Now it was mutual. Above ground, Celine Hart authorized the first deliberate signal, not a broadcast, not a demand. A pattern of lights across the bay, synchronized to no known language or protocol, just rhythm, presence without message. Mara watched it unfold. "This is us saying," she whispered. "We're here, that's all." The lights reflected on the water. Nothing answered, but the observer shifted, barely perceptible, yet unmistakable to Elias. It adjusted its relative position by a fraction, as if acknowledging the gesture without committing to reply. Waiting continued, heavier now. Shared. Chapter 38. The second UFO returned without warning. Not above the city, above the ocean. It moved wrong. Faster than expectation, slower than threat. It cut through atmospheric layers without disturbing them, a contradiction made real. Elias felt the first observer react instantly. Corridors snapped into tighter alignment. Energy redistribution surged, not toward weapons, but toward separation. "It's positioning again," he said. "Blocking." Mara felt the city tense around her. Sirens did not sound. Instructions did not come. People froze anyway, some from fear, some from awe. Public feeds lit up. 2 UFOs confirmed. Objects interacting. No hostility observed. The second anomaly pressed closer, not to the city, but to the first UFO's boundary. Space itself seemed to resist where they neared one another, like incompatible ideas refusing overlap. Celine Hart gripped the edge of the table. "Are they negotiating?" "No," Mara said softly. "They're defining limits." Deep beneath the streets, Elias felt strain, not in the city, but in the observer. Holding position required cost. Yielding would too. For the first time, the observer made a choice visible in consequence. It did not retreat. It absorbed the pressure. The second anomaly withdrew slightly, as if surprised. For 7 seconds, nothing moved. Then it vanished, faster than before, leaving no echo. The observer remained. Chapter 39. Afterward, nothing felt hypothetical. The question was no longer whether humanity was alone. It was whether it was represented. Mara sat with Celine in silence long after the feeds ended. "It stood for us," Celine said finally, "without asking." "Yes," Mara replied, "and that's terrifying." Deep beneath the city, Elias confronted the implication directly. "You intervened," he projected. "Why?" The observer did not answer immediately. When it did, the alignment carried weight it had never held before. Asterisk continuity preference. Elias exhaled slowly. "You want us to keep going?" Asterisk. "Yes." Asterisk. Above ground, public reaction fractured into something new. Not panic, not celebration. Responsibility. People argued less about invasion and more about obligation. If something unknown chose to hold a line for them, what did that demand in return? Mara felt the question settle into her bones. "We're being witnessed," she said, "and defended, maybe." Celine nodded grimly. "That's not safety. That's accountability." Chapter 40. The city did not sleep that night. Not because of fear, but because something fundamental had shifted. The sky no longer felt empty. Silence no longer felt neutral. Elias stood alone in the core, watching the observer maintain its quiet vigil. No signals, no demands, just position. "You can't do this forever," he said gently. The observer did not deny it. Asterisk cost accumulates. "Yes," Elias agreed, "for all of us." Above ground, Mara stepped into the street just before dawn. People were already out, talking softly, sharing coffee, standing together without plan. No one looked up. They already knew where the sky was. This changes us, she said aloud. Even if nothing else happens." The city answered, not in words, but in posture. It oriented itself toward continuity again, but now with an added axis: stewardship, not just of itself, but of the line that had been drawn on its behalf. Far above, the observer held, not as a guardian, not as a ruler, but as a presence that had chosen to stay, knowing now what staying cost. And somewhere beyond detection, something else was still moving, watching the line, waiting to see if it would hold. Chapter 41. The line held. That was the first official assessment, released in language so neutral it bordered on denial. No incursion, no engagement, no measurable aftermath beyond atmospheric anomalies and public unrest. Unofficially, everyone knew better. Elias felt it in the city's bones. The observer's continued presence altered baseline assumptions. Models that once terminated at uncertainty now extended indefinitely, forced to account for a variable that refused resolution. "You're still here," Elias said quietly. The observer did not reply, but its alignment tightened, subtle, enduring. Holding position was no longer a momentary act. It was becoming a role. Above ground, Mara watched the social shift accelerate. Not panic, not devotion, adaptation. People began speaking about the UFO the way they spoke about weather or gravity. Dangerous, unavoidable, there. A child drew it in chalk on a sidewalk, a shape with no edges, hovering protectively over stick-figure buildings. Celine Hart saw the drawing and felt something twist in her chest. "They're normalizing it." "Yes," Mara said. "That's how we survive things we can't remove." Deep beneath the city, the observer registered the shift. Asterisk. Cultural assimilation increasing. Elias nodded. "Now you're part of the mess." The observer held. Chapter 42. The second presence did not return, but traces did. Satellite data showed disturbances far from the city, transient and sharp, like scars left by something passing too close to reality. No pattern, no repetition. "It's testing boundaries elsewhere," Celine said, "or looking for weaker lines." Mara frowned. "Or learning restraint." Deep beneath the streets, Elias felt the observer's attention stretch, maintaining position over the city while extending awareness outward. The strain was unmistakable now. "You're doing two things at once," Elias said. "That costs you." Asterisk cost acknowledged. The observer did not specify further. Above ground, a new debate ignited, not about UFOs, but about agency. Was humanity protected or merely tolerated? Was the city chosen or simply convenient? Mara addressed a public forum that night, voice steady but tired. "Being defended doesn't make us special," she said. "It makes us responsible for what we do next." Some applauded. Others walked out. The city absorbed the division without rupture. Deep beneath it, the observer processed the exchange, not as approval metrics, but as variance within commitment. Disagreement, it was learning, did not negate continuity. It reinforced it. Chapter 43. The signal came from the ocean floor, not from the UFO, from below it. A harmonic disturbance, low frequency and rhythmic, rising from depths no sensor grid fully covered. Too regular to be geological, too slow to be technological. Elias felt it like a bruise forming. "This isn't them," he said. "This is something else." Above ground, emergency teams mobilized without announcement. Research vessels diverted. Data was siloed faster than it could leak. Mara watched the readouts in silence. "So many unknowns," she whispered, "and we thought we were done being surprised." The observer reacted immediately, not moving, but reorienting its internal alignments downward toward the source. For the first time, it displayed uncertainty without concealment. Asterisk origin classification unresolved. Elias swallowed. You don't know either. The harmonic pulse repeated, stronger this time. The city trembled not with fear, but with anticipation, sharpened by dread. The line above still held. But now something was pushing from below. Chapter 44. The ocean disturbance stopped as suddenly as it had begun. No eruption, no emergence, just silence, thicker than before. Research vessels reported nothing. Sensors returned to baseline. Officials declared it a false alarm. No one believed them. Deep beneath the city, Elias felt the observer tighten, not outward, but inward. Whatever had stirred below had been logged, not dismissed. Asterisk threat classification deferred. Mara leaned against a wall, exhausted. Deferred doesn't mean gone. No, Celine said. It means waiting for leverage. Public trust wavered, not because of lies, but because of gaps. Too many things now existed beyond explanation. The UFO above the city remained steady. For the first time, people began to ask a quieter question. Not asterisk, what is it? But asterisk, who is it protecting us from? The city had no answer. The observer did not offer one, but it stayed. Chapter 45. The pressure of being held changed people. Some became kinder, some became harder. A few became reckless, convinced that protection implied permission. Mara confronted one of them, a council member pushing for aggressive expansion, citing cosmic deterrence as justification. You think having a UFO above us makes us untouchable? She asked. I think it means we're backed, he replied. She shook her head. No, it means we're visible. Deep beneath the city, Elias felt the observer register the exchange. Asterisk visibility increases consequence. Yes, Elias said. Exactly. That night the observer shifted, just enough to be noticed. Not retreating, not advancing, reasserting the line. A reminder. People gathered outside, watching the sky in silence. No cheers, no screams. Just understanding. Mara stood among them, arms crossed, breathing steady. We're not being saved, she said softly. We're being witnessed while we choose. Above, the UFO held its place, between threats known and unknown, between humanity and whatever waited beyond certainty. The city stood with it, and far below the ocean floor, something ancient adjusted its rhythm, aware now that the line was no longer undefended. Chapter 46. The ocean did not forget. That was Elias's first thought when the harmonic disturbance failed to return, but also failed to fade. Absence, he had learned, could be as active as presence. Some things retreated only to measure what followed. Below the city, the observer remained fixed, its alignments taut, like a held breath. You're listening downward now, Elias said. So am I. The city adjusted its deep infrastructure, pressure sensors, seismic arrays, systems never meant to speak to one another now exchanging fragments of signal. Nothing definitive emerged, only rhythm memory. Above ground, Mara walked the shoreline at dawn. The water looked unchanged, gentle even, too gentle. People think danger announces itself, she murmured. It doesn't. Behind her, a fisherman packed up without explanation, leaving early. She watched him go, unease settling in her chest. Somewhere below, something was waiting. Chapter 47. The first failure was small. A desalination plant shut down for 6 minutes. No alarm, no damage. Just a brief loss of output that no automated system could fully explain. Then another.
then a sensor blackout along a fault line far offshore. Elias watched the pattern form reluctantly. "It's probing," he said, "not attacking." Mapping response. The observer reacted with heightened focus, but no counteraction. Its presence above the city did not shift even as attention split. Asterisk intervention threshold not met, the alignment conveyed. Mara felt anger spark unexpectedly. "You're letting it test us." The observer did not deny it. Some tests, it seemed, had to be endured to be understood. Above ground, officials spoke of maintenance issues. People noticed anyway. Water pressure fluctuated. Power flickered for half a heartbeat too long. Fear crept back in, not sharp but sour. The city held. Barely. Chapter 48. The message came without words. A deep-sea drone, rerouted automatically after a sensor anomaly, returned footage that should not have existed. Shadows moving against pressure-resistant darkness, not creatures, not machines, structures. Impossible geometry embedded in the ocean floor. Not built. Grown. Mara stared at the images until her eyes ached. "That's not new," she whispered. "That's old." Deep beneath the city, Elias felt the observer's reaction surge, more pronounced than any time since the second UFO's arrival. Asterisk classification conflict detected. "You recognize it," Elias said. The observer paused, longer than ever before. Asterisk precedent exists. The word sent a chill through the core. Above ground, Selene Hart closed the room to all but 3 people. "If there's something down there older than us," she said carefully, "and something above us choosing to hold a line." Mara finished the thought. "Then we're in the middle." The city seemed to lean inward,
as if bracing for that truth. Chapter 49. The second UFO returned, but not to the sky, to the sea. A distortion formed above the water, low and deliberate, pressing downward without touching the surface. Waves flattened beneath it, stilled by invisible pressure. Elias felt the observer react instantly, this time with motion. It shifted, not aggressively, but decisively, reasserting the line in 3 dimensions. "This isn't about us," Elias said, realization dawning. It never was. Mara watched from a distance, heart hammering. "Then why are we here?" The observer answered, not in alignment but in action. It descended, not fully, just enough to intersect the second presence's path. Space bent. The air hummed with strain. 2 unknowns negotiating territory humanity had never known it occupied. The second anomaly recoiled, sharply this time. It fled. The ocean's surface resumed motion as if nothing had happened. But everyone watching knew better. Something ancient below had been acknowledged. And something above had chosen a side again. Chapter 50. After that, the world felt smaller. Not diminished, contained. The city did not celebrate, neither did it panic. It adjusted, quietly absorbing the implications of forces older and larger than itself. Deep beneath the streets, Elias finally asked the question he had avoided. "You've seen this before," he said to the observer. "Down there." Asterisk. "Yes." Asterisk. "And you stayed this time?" Asterisk. "Yes." Asterisk. Mara stood at the water's edge as night fell, waves lapping softly. "So what are we now?" she asked the empty air. "A protected zone? A witness?" The observer did not answer directly, but it held position above, between, and now also against what stirred below. The city felt it settle into something unprecedented. Not safety, not danger, custodianship. Humanity had not been chosen as rulers or victims. It had been left in place, between sky and deep, between forces that did not speak its language. pretend, to decide, to endure. And somewhere far beneath the ocean floor, ancient structures adjusted again, aware now that the surface was no longer undefended and no longer irrelevant. Chapter 51. Custodianship was not a title anyone accepted willingly. It crept into language sideways, through policy drafts that avoided the word, through conversations that stalled before naming responsibility. Elias felt it settle into the city like a new gravitational constant, not heavy enough to crush, but impossible to ignore. "We're maintaining a balance we didn't design," he said quietly. "That never ends well." The city did not contradict him. It recalibrated instead, prioritizing continuity across layers it had never modeled together before. Sky, surface, deep. A three-dimensional ethics problem with no clean solution. Above ground, Mara felt it as social fatigue, sharpening into resolve. People stopped asking for answers. They started asking what they could do without making things worse. Celine Hart noticed the shift and did not try to steer it. "Let it happen," she said. "This isn't something leadership can own." Deep beneath the city, the observer adjusted its posture again, not closer, not farther, steadier. Asterisk custodial alignment stabilized. The alignment conveyed. Elias frowned. "You're naming it." Asterisk. "You are enacting it." The distinction mattered. Chapter 52. The deep responded, not with movement, but with signal. Low-frequency emissions pulsed upward through the water column, not disruptive, not destructive. Communicative, in a way that bypassed language entirely. Pressure waves tuned to thresholds only infrastructure could feel. Elias sensed them like distant thunder felt through bone. "It's not attacking," he said. "It's acknowledging the line." Above ground, sensors lit up in quiet sequences, no alarms, just confirmation. Mara watched the readouts and felt something tighten in her chest. "That thing down there knows it was noticed." "Yes," Celine said, "and it knows something else noticed it too." The observer reacted with restraint, not advancing, not withdrawing, holding, listening. For the first time since its arrival, it did not dominate the interaction. It allowed the deep to speak first. Chapter 53. Meaning emerged when no one expected it. The harmonic pulses repeated, not identical, but patterned. Variations mapped cleanly against tectonic stress lines, thermal gradients, even human infrastructure placement. Elias stared at the overlay in disbelief. "It's aware of us," he whispered, "not as individuals, as weight." Above ground, Mara felt the implication land heavily. "We've been pressing on it for centuries." The city responded instinctively, rerouting extraction, reducing deep-sea disruption, pausing projects once considered untouchable. Not out of fear, out of recognition. The observer registered the shift immediately. Asterisk behavioral modification detected. "Yes," Elias said, "we're listening back." The pulses softened, slowed. Somewhere far below, ancient structures adjusted, not awakening, not retreating, accommodating. For the first time, the line did not feel like a barrier. It felt like a boundary both sides recognized. Chapter 54. Recognition carried cost. Markets reacted poorly to halted projects. Political pressure surged. Voices rose accusing the city of surrendering to fear of the unknown. Mara stood in front of a hostile assembly and did not raise her voice. "We didn't stop because we're afraid," she said. "We stopped because we finally noticed something else was already there." Boos mixed with applause. Celine Hart watched from the back of the room, knowing this fracture could not be repaired quickly
or neatly. Deep beneath the city, Elias felt the observer absorb the conflict without interference. Human divergence increasing. Yes, Elias replied, that's normal. The observer paused. Normal, it was learning, did not mean acceptable. It meant real. Above the city, clouds drifted lazily across a sky that now felt watched, but not owned. Below the ocean, the deep remained still, but attentive. Chapter 55. The balance held. Not because it was stable, but because everyone involved was paying attention. Elias stood in the core, exhausted beyond measure, yet strangely grounded. This is the work now, he said. Not solving, not conquering, holding. The city hummed in agreement. Systems aligned not for growth, but for endurance. Above ground, Mara walked the shoreline again. The water reflected stars imperfectly, broken by small waves. She liked it that way. We're not the center, she said softly, but we matter where we stand. The observer maintained its position above, between and against excess, not a guardian, not a god, a participant. And deep below, ancient structures pulsed once more, faint, almost gentle. Acknowledgement. The city breathed. The sky held. The deep waited. And humanity, no longer alone, no longer irrelevant, remained in the middle, learning at last how to stay. Chapter 56. Staying required translation, not language, framework. Elias felt it form slowly inside the city's core, a pressure to convert lived tension into something repeatable, something that could be carried forward without him standing there forever. We can't be the only hinge, he said. This has to outlive us. The city responded by externalizing memory, not archives, ritualized processes. Cycles of review tied to seasons, not emergencies. Decisions revisited not when broken, but when forgotten. Above ground, Mara sensed the shift as rhythm returning. Public meetings scheduled not to resolve crisis, but to revisit assumptions. Long pauses written into agendas on purpose. Celine Hart smiled faintly when she saw it. They're building habits. Deep beneath the city, the observer registered the change. Continuity scaffolding detected. Yes, Elias replied. We're learning how to hand this off. Chapter 57. The deep responded again. This time, not with pulses, but with absence. Seismic noise dropped below expected background. Currents adjusted minutely. Pressure gradients smoothed where they should not have. It's making space, Mara whispered as she watched the data. For us. For coexistence, Celine said, or for patience. The observer reacted cautiously, maintaining the line without advancing, its internal models updated, not to dominate the deep, but to avoid provoking it. Mutual tolerant state emerging. Elias felt a strange relief. That's the first stable word I've heard in weeks. Above ground, fishermen returned to waters they had avoided, not because they were told it was safe, but because it felt allowed. No one celebrated. They just resumed. Chapter 58. Then came the question no one wanted. If this balance existed here, was it unique? Signals, faint, indirect, surfaced from other coastal systems around the world, not disturbances, adjustments, as if lines were being drawn quietly elsewhere. Mara felt cold spread through her chest. It's not just us. Deep beneath the city, Elias felt the observer's attention stretched thinner, not weaker, but divided. Replication risk acknowledged. You can't hold everywhere, Elias said. Asterisk nude. Asterisk. The answer carried no hesitation. Celine Hart closed her eyes. Then what happens to the rest? No one answered. The city tightened, not in fear but in focus. If this place was one of few held lines, it would have to matter beyond itself. Custodianship was no longer local. Chapter 59. The observer changed again. Not position, but behavior. It began to release fragments, not messages, not instructions, constraints, subtle biases introduced into human systems that favored restraint over extraction, repair over acceleration, not control. Influence. Elias felt it immediately. You're seeding us. Asterisk capability sharing. Mara frowned. You're trusting us with parts of yourself. The observer did not deny it. Trust, once extended, altered the exchange irreversibly. Above ground, policies shifted organically across regions without coordination. Similar decisions made for different reasons. Reduction, pause, care, echoing without mandate. Celine Hart watched the pattern emerge. This isn't defense, she said softly. It's succession planning. Chapter 60. Succession terrified Elias more than threat ever had. You're planning for a time after you, he said to the observer, or after us. Asterisk continuity requires redundancy. Yes, Elias replied, but redundancy also means loss. The observer paused, longer than usual. Asterisk loss accepted. Above ground, Mara stood on a bluff overlooking the ocean, wind pulling at her coat. Nothing that stays lasts forever, she said, and that doesn't make it meaningless. The city held the truth without flinching. Above, the observer remained, for now. Below, the deep stayed still. Between them, humanity learned something no technology had ever taught it before: how to inherit responsibility without conquest, how to stand between forces without claiming ownership, how to continue, knowing that someday the line would have to be held by someone else. And for the first time, that future did not feel like abandonment. It felt like trust. Chapter 61. Trust altered posture. Elias felt it in the city's core as a subtle redistribution of agency. Systems no longer waited for confirmation from above or below. They acted within bounds that had not been enforced, only learned. This is dangerous, he said quietly. We're acting without supervision. The city answered with something new, not certainty, but confidence. It had internalized the line. It no longer needed to see it constantly to respect it. Above ground, Mara noticed people speaking differently. Less allowed, more appropriate. Less can we, more should we. Responsibility had shifted from external consequence to internal measure. The observer registered the change. Asterisk autonomous constraint, integrity rising. Yes, Elias replied. We're carrying it ourselves now. Chapter 62. The first true mistake followed quickly. A coastal barrier project, well-intentioned, carefully modelled, disrupted a migration pattern no one had thought to check. The impact was small but immediate. Life displaced, balance nudged. Mara stood before cameras and did not deflect. We were wrong, she said. We'll undo it. No justification. No defense. Markets dipped. Critics surged. The city adjusted anyway. Deep beneath the streets, Elias felt the observer watch, not intervene. Asterisk correction capacity observed. Learning includes failure, Elias said. You knew that. The observer paused. Asterisk yes. Observing it enacted differs. Above ground, volunteers dismantled what had been built, not efficiently, not cleanly, but completely. The deep responded, not with signal, but with tolerance. The line held. Chapter 63. Absence returned. Not below. Above, the observer's presence thinned, not in location, but in intensity. Less pressure, less alignment feedback, as if something had stepped back without leaving. Elias noticed immediately. "You're trusting the space," he said. Asterisk testing persistence. Mara felt it as a strange loneliness. It feels like when someone stops watching over your shoulder. "Yes," Elias said. "That's adulthood." The city did not falter, processes continued, rituals repeated, and attention held without reinforcement. Far above, the observer remained, but lighter. For the first time, it was not shaping outcomes in real time. It was waiting to see if it needed to. Chapter 64. The deep shifted again. Not toward the city. Away. Pressure gradients eased. Harmonic traces dissipated. Ancient structures quieted, not retreating, but settling deeper into patience. "They're pulling back," Celine Hart said softly. "They don't feel pressed anymore." Mara watched the data fade into baseline. "So, this is what peace looks like." "No," Elias said. "This is what respect looks like." The observer registered the change with the subtle reorientation, not defensive now, but observational in a broader arc. Asterisk stability achieved through mutual disengagement. The city absorbed the truth carefully. Peace was not presence. It was restraint. Chapter 65. The line became invisible. Not gone, internalized. People stopped looking up, stopped scanning the water. Life did not return to how it had been. It returned differently. Elias stood in the core one last time before stepping back from constant oversight. "You don't need me here anymore," he said to the city. The city did not protest. Above ground, Mara walked through a market rebuilt twice now, once by error, once by care. She smiled at the uneven stalls, the inefficient joy of it all. "We'll forget," she said softly, "and remember again." Far above, the observer held its distant vigil, not as a line, not as a shield, as a witness that no longer needed to intervene to matter. Below, the deep waited, ancient, aware, unprovoked. Between them, humanity continued, not chosen, not spared, trusted. And that, more than any protection, changed everything. Chapter 66. The word surfaced without ceremony. UFO. It appeared first in a margin note of an internal report, then in a transcript that was never meant to be public. Someone said it aloud in a room where no one corrected them. Mara heard it and did not flinch. "If we're using the word," she said, "then we're admitting uncertainty." Celine Hart nodded, and maturity. The city registered the linguistic shift immediately. Labels mattered. Naming the phenomenon as unidentified preserved humility. It resisted false certainty. Above, the observer registered the term with mild interest. Asterisk, human classification updated. "Yes," Elias replied quietly. "We finally stopped pretending we knew what you were." The observer did not correct them. It did not need to. Chapter 67. Public awareness followed slowly, unevenly. Footage leaked. Nothing dramatic. Light bending strangely. Sky behavior that refused to resolve into aircraft or illusion. Ocean data that suggested mass without form. News anchors said the word carefully. UFO. Some laughed, some prayed, some shrugged. Market stabilized faster than expected. Fear burned out when no invasion followed, no ultimatum, no demand. Just presence. Mara watched a panel debate collapse into silence when no one could explain what the phenomenon wanted. "That might be the point," she said afterward. "Maybe it doesn't want Deep beneath the city, Elias felt the observer accept the framing. Asterisk, non-intent attribution acceptable. That's the closest thing to peace we've had, Elias said. Chapter 68. The observer prepared to leave. Not abruptly, not dramatically. Its alignment thinned further, pulling away from constant synchronization with the city's systems. Feedback loops loosened. Constraints remained, but no longer required reinforcement. Elias sensed it like a cooling surface after heat has passed. You're disengaging. Asterisk roll concluded. You're sure? He asked. Asterisk yes. Asterisk. Above ground, Mara felt an unexpected ache. It feels like goodbye. Celine Hart corrected her gently. It feels like graduation. The deep did not react. It did not need to. Balance had become habitual. Chapter 69. The final test came without warning. A seismic event, natural, unavoidable, rippled through the region. Old fault lines stirred, infrastructure strained. For a moment, every system waited, not for the observer, for itself. The city responded with restraint, rerouting power, sacrificing efficiency to preserve stability. People followed guidance not because it was enforced, but because it made sense. No intervention came from above, no signal from below. The crisis passed with loss, but not collapse. Elias exhaled shakily. We did it. Far above, the observer registered the outcome. Asterisk persistence confirmed. It turned, subtly, almost imperceptibly, toward elsewhere. Chapter 70. Years later, the word remained. UFO. Still unresolved, still debated, still present in footnotes, documentaries, and quiet conversations near water. No one claimed understanding, but the city endured. Mara aged into a quieter role, walking shorelines and smiling at a world that had learned to pause. Celine Hart's name became shorthand for restraint taught at scale. Elias vanished from public view, leaving behind systems that remembered how to choose carefully. Above the planet, something watched from farther away now. Not guarding, not guiding. Witnessing a species that had learned, briefly, imperfectly, how to stand between forces without trying to own them. The deep remained ancient and patient. The sky remained vast and unresolved. And humanity continued, not alone, not enlightened, but aware enough to ask better questions. That was enough. For now.